Amendments 2011-125 and 2011-122 Property Standards Bylaw prepared by Shane Turner. There's no presentation, but Shane is here to answer any questions. Have we any questions? Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Perhaps you could give a flavor of some of the details that you saw in other communities' bylaws that might be applicable here that we can use and we hope to use in the coming future.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Councillor Bork, to Mayor Jaworski. What we've done as a continual review of our regulations around dealing with public spaces and private property, we've identified a couple of amendments that would be useful in our public nuisance and property standards bylaw. These are based on situations that we've seen in other municipalities. So what we're proposing to do is provide an amendment in our public nuisance bylaw that deals with large gatherings, and in particular large gatherings that would impact public safety by encroaching on public right-of-ways. That's the one approach. The other approach that we're taking with the with the nuisance bylaw as well is adding a cost recovery provision. And the cost recovery provision is something that is common in many of our other bylaws to give us the ability to recover costs for any unforeseen circumstances that might arise during the administration of the bylaw. So, in other words, if someone decides to create a condition or create a situation that impacts public safety and draws on our resources, we have the ability to make them accountable for those costs. The third provision that we're looking at is a general safety provision in our property standards bylaw, which is not uncommon to situations that I've worked in other areas. And what it does is provides a general provision that would allow us to deal with what might be an unforeseen safety concern. For members of council, as you may know, our property standards bylaw is comprised of a list of sections of regulations that deal with property maintenance and property safety and structural issues. But if a situation arises that we can't specifically fit into an existing section, we've got this general provision that will help us address any unforeseen or undue risks to public safety or the occupants of a building.
So at this, through the chair, at this point in time, what are our next steps in terms of forming the bylaw, things like set fines and stuff like that? Obviously things like those take time, training the staff in order to get it in use as soon as possible. Maybe you could comment a bit on that, about what are all our next steps in making this happen once we review this tonight.
Well, our immediate next steps are twofold. We'll be communicating with our staff as to what the implications are. Many of our staff have already been involved in this review. When we've looked at these provisions, we've talked it over with all of our staff as well as community partners in terms of making sure that this makes sense. So there's been a fair amount of research behind the scenes that way, but we'll then inform staff as to how we would apply the regulations if and when need be. That's the first piece. The second piece, and probably the most important piece, is that we will provide some public messaging so that people understand that they may be held accountable in a situation where public safety is impacted.
Councillor Whaley.
Mr. Turner, I've got feedback, and I'm sure other members of council have, with respect to the timing of this bylaw, being just a couple of weeks before St. Paddy's Day, and the comments were around the fact that we were just setting the table for a more hardline approach to that event. And this is a great opportunity here to get that myth dispelled. Could you give us a little information on that?
Through Councillor Bork, the review of these types of bylaw enhancements has been underway for some time. So I can tell you that these provisions would be coming forward regardless of the situation. I am cognizant of the fact that it is coming in at a time shortly before when we have had these types of situations on private property and in public space before. So, once we've identified a tool that could help us, it made sense to bring it into play at the appropriate time. So, I'm not going to, bypass the fact that this is happening before March 17th, which is an area that, a time period that has caused us some concerns in the past. But the key piece of this is we need to undertake our obligations with respect to public safety, and also holding people accountable for those types of situations that impact that public safety.
Our citizens in general, and our student population in particular, have a hard time keeping up with bylaws and what bylaws apply to them and under the circumstances with such short notice. How are you going to get this message out that the bylaws have changed, that they have they'll have a real impact on people? How are they going to be? How are we going to prepare them for the inevitable clashes that face us in the future?
Through you, Councillor Bork, to Councillor Wheeler, there's a couple of approaches. In the short term, we have a communications piece that's going to unfold later this week. On Wednesday, we're doing a door knocker campaign, and we've got a significant number of the student body and different student groups and the student unions, as well as faculty and our community partners involved in that. So we're going to be rolling out our messaging through that. And again, it's just one of many other messages that that are intended to keep the public safe and reduce our public safety risks. The other longer term piece is, and Council may recall that I mentioned this during the review of the residential rental licensing bylaw, that we need to increase our efforts, particularly around the student population, since they are, many of them are new to our community. So this will be blended into the public messaging. We have an information page on our website, and we have committed to increasing not just this message, but messages across the board around our regulations.
I have one question, Shane, and that's you mentioned that you've tapped into other cities for expertise on this. What's been their experience with this kind of bylaw? Have they had to use it? Has it been effective?
To you, Councillor Bork, we've talked specifically with the cities of London and Guelph, and the reason for that is that they have public nuisance bylaws that are similar to ours. But in talking with them, we had identified that they had some enhanced regulations that we didn't have, and that's what led us to an amendment tonight that we feel fits the Waterloo experience. Just recently, and I can't speak for the city of Guelph, but I can say recently they had a situation where, coming out of homecoming, there was some a significant undertaking or significant situation that caused damage, and I know that they used their bylaw provision to hold those people accountable. So that's really and they were successful in it. So that's what we're really talking about is just being able to use the tool if and when necessary to deal with a particular circumstance that we may have not been able to foresee otherwise.
Thank you. Any further questions? I guess we're looking for somebody to move this. Councillor Durrell, second by Mayor Jaworski. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call it. All those in favor? That would be all of us. We will move to event parking and traffic planning tool for information. And prepared by Jillian. Anybody with any questions? Councillor Henry?
Thank you, Chair Burke. I appreciate that we certainly have some occasional need for better planning around significant events, and I think a lot of what's in this tool is has the potential to be significantly helpful, leveraging other parking resources, requiring folks to manage bringing people to and from those so that they use all the resources we have in the area and the broader area to bear. But I did take note of what appears to be just an acceptance by practice of what we're already seeing too much of, and that's using bike lanes as part of the parking regime. I could say a lot about what I think about that, but perhaps I'll just ask a more focused question on how will our population that chooses cycling as an alternative form be informed of when the city will take those facilities away and make it harder for them to make their journeys to work or to even this event or any events that may happen. So how will folks be aware of that?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair Bork, to you, Councillor Henry. We have an extensive communications plans that we put in for all events that we take in. So in this specific incident, it's first important to note that the bike lane parking would only be considered an option for events that fit the criteria. One of them would be that they have to have a permit with the city, so example for a facility rental. And then it would be a limited time frame. And also that each event would be assessed on an individual basis. So bearing all those different criteria, the one that's most applicable would be that in order for the cars to be allowed to park on the bike lanes, they'd have to have an availability of another alternative use for the cyclists. So in the case of a Millennium Drive, there's a multi-use trail on the other side of the bike lane there. So communication to the cyclists, and I'll use the Ontario Volleyball Championships as an example because it's probably the only event that we have in our portfolio to date that this would apply for. That there'll be significant communications that are starting this week to patrons and to the community residents. The residents have already been engaged locally in the neighboring communities. We will be doing an extensive communication plan to them, including door-to-door as well as signage on the trails in advance. So there will be signage going up notifying them that the trails will be closed for the specific period of time and asking them to use the multi-use trail across the street, as well as we'll be using social media beginning probably just after March break, so about 2 weeks in advance of this particular event to notify the cyclists.
Councillor, go ahead.
I think this is worthwhile seeing how we can manage all of that and recognizing it's for information rather than for any direction. I would look forward to making sure we catalog what feedback we get on all of the aspects of this tool as staff consider future years beyond this one.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke. I must admit that I had an opportunity to review this briefing note ahead of time because of the Ontario Volleyball Championships, and it's been an ongoing challenge, the parking associated with that event. And while I agree with the decision around Millennium Park, it's only because of the fact that there are multi-use trails and because I'm assured that the signage for cyclists will be clear and concise and help them to enter the trail system early, so back on to University Avenue and so on. But I do have significant concern with this being used as a tool for future events. So for example, some years off in the future, Waterloo Park may become a venue to host a lot of events. And even when there's baseball tournaments that happen now at Waterloo Park, we cannot be using on-street parking on Father David Bauer Drive, for example, in those bike lanes, because that is the only safe way. I mean, it would be preferable to have an off-road bike multi-use trail there, but we don't right now. And I also think that the continued parking in the bike lanes in Uptown Waterloo, and we don't have the excuse that we're parking snow on them right now, is terrible. And it's setting an incredibly bad example of how it is that we as a city feel about enforcing bike lanes. And so I'm pretty concerned about that aspect of this report. So I just don't want my agreement with this report tonight by any way to suggest that I'm okay with parking in bike lanes, because I'm not. It's only where we have very viable off-road infrastructure that is maintained and usable.
Any other comments? Seeing none, thank you. We will move along to the Maple Hill Creek Class Environmental Assessment. And we have a presentation from Jeff Daniel.
Is it on? There we go. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. We're here tonight to present the Class Environmental Assessment for Maple Hill Creek, the results of which Jeff Daniel is going to provide a presentation to give you a brief summary on the CA.
Mr. Mayor, members of Council, we get into the presentation, you'll see there were some areas where there were some potential impacts to private property. The study area was broken into 6 reaches. Reach 1 at the upstream end has two surface water management areas, as well as a connecting section of creek. Reach 2 is a buried section. It's in culvert, and then reaches 3 through 6 are open channel through residential areas, and with the downstream section paralleling University Ave. The creek's been highly modified over the years by development activities. The urbanization has increased the flow and caused erosion and flooding concerns along the creek, as well as a number of barriers to fish passage having been put in place over the years. Prior to the EA and during the EA, residents identified a number of areas where there were potential issues with property loss due to bank erosion, both some existing loss and some potential future loss. And the stormwater management areas, the upstream one, Westvale Park, was almost completely full of sediment and requires clean out. And there were some outlet clogging and drainage issues in the Westvale stormwater management area, which is the downstream section. During the implementation of the EA, we've completed 3 of 4 PICs, one at the outset of the project to identify the objectives of the project to the public, second one to present alternative solutions, and a third to identify the preferred alternative. They were all well attended, and we got some good feedback from members of the community. And I think the members of the community are fairly positive on the solutions we're looking at. The last PIC will be scheduled when the design is complete and we're getting ready to go to construction. As part of the evaluation of alternatives, we developed an alternative review matrix that looked at project cost, the technical effectiveness of the options we're looking at, the impacts to the natural environment, both negative during implementation and potential positive impacts, impacts to private property, access for construction, and then also considered social and cultural issues. When we're doing the alternatives review, we looked at a range of alternatives from do nothing through making some minor repairs, doing a partial restoration of the reach, and then a full reach restoration. The preferred alternatives that we arrived at for Reach 1, the Westvale Park surface water management area, we considered adding oil grit separators upstream of the pond, as well as several different pond configurations, open water pond, and the preferred alternative was a wetland, so there'd be a small forebay at each, or 2 of the inlets. The third inlet is too small to put a forebay in, too close to the outlet, so we put an oil grit separator in there, and then construct a wetland area in the rest of the pond. The alternative, or the cost of the preferred alternative, is estimated at $590,000. The channel that connects the 2 surface water management areas, there are some gabion baskets that are starting to fail, and those would be repaired and made stable. And then the stormwater management area at the downstream end of Reach 1, there'd be some outlet modifications to try and address some of the debris clogging issues and facilitate the stormwater management area draining out in within 24 hours, which was the original design intent. Reach 2, which is the section that's entirely enclosed and buried, we're looking at just making some minor repairs that were recommended in previous inspections of the culvert to the concrete, as well as their residents identified some small or some minor drainage issues that were created that adding a catch basin will help with the flooding issues and alleviate those. And the cost of those activities in Reach 2 is about $40,000. Reach 3, this is Probably the most significant change from existing conditions, you can see in the photograph on the left, the existing gabion baskets are failing. There's some bracing there that's been installed by residents to protect a retaining wall that's just off the edge of the picture. This is the area where there are some properties that are at risk if nothing is done. And we looked at two options really to address that. One was to replace it with an open channel with stable walls, which would require some sort of an engineered retaining wall to keep the stability of the properties. The alternative that we've recommended is burying a section of the channel that basically extends the section of Reach 2 that's buried down a little bit further until we get to an area where we can build a stable channel without needing to do a lot of construction. The estimated cost is a little over $700,000, which is comparable to restoring a stable open channel in that area. There are some habitat impacts that we'll have to work through with GRCA and DFO, but we believe they'll see that that's a positive outcome given their necessity to protect protect properties and the impacts to fish passage caused by the culvert upstream. There's no real fish passage in that area in the existing conditions. Reach 4, we are recommending some partial restoration. There are some gabion baskets that we'll take out and replace with a more natural bank stabilization, as well as there's a flow that comes in from Westmount Golf Course that there's some energy dissipation that needs to be done to stabilize the creek in that area. The estimated cost of that work is about $315,000. Reach 5, you can see the top photo there is a concrete line channel that we'll remove, as well as a weir that blocks fish passage, and restore that as a natural channel. And the estimated cost for that work is about $500,000. Reach 6 is just a localized restoration. Parts of the channel are in good shape. That work is being coordinated with the regional municipality of Waterloo, the widening of University Ave, to ensure that the channel is in an appropriate location with the road widening there, and that the banks are stable in the long term. And the estimated cost of that work is $240,000. The total capital costs are estimated at about $2.64 million. Following the approval of the EA and posting it for the public review period, we'll start the design on the project. Reach 6, we've accelerated the design to make sure we can combine the work with the region's schedule for the road widening and take advantage of the efficiencies there. And we'll phase the implementation of the work to match up with available budget in the city's budget. Following council's approval of the report, as I mentioned, it'll go out for a 30-day public comment period, and we'll start the detailed design work and permitting activities. And we're anticipating tendering late this year and actually getting out into the field at the end of the year. That's all I had.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Through Chair Burke. I just wanted to get some insight from the public meetings. Can we anticipate any Part 2 requesters once this EA is put to a 30-day period?
I don't believe so. I think the primary concerns that were identified were Reach 3 with the properties in that area. I think we're addressing that. That was probably the concern we heard the most. The other concern we heard from some of their Reach 5, I guess Reach 4 and 5 residents were related to some flooding issues. Some of the residents that had lived there for a long time had seen the evolution of the creek as areas upstream were urbanized, and we basically explained to them that that was something that we couldn't change the flow regime back to what it was, 20 or 30 years ago, and we were able to make some minor improvements in flood storage, but they understand that we can't mitigate some of the concerns that they had just because the system has changed due to the urbanization. So,
Councillor Henry and I don't want to relive that experience. I'm just saying. The other question was just with regard to the concrete channel and the timing thereof. I gather, those channels do decline in their strength and stability, and they are, I think that today's day and age, we know that a natural channel actually functions much better.
yeah.
Is the channel in poor repair? Like, is now the time to schedule that capital improvement, or should that wait till the channel is in dire need?
It is degrading, but that is a section that would probably be on the lower priority as far as the urgency based on the existing conditions.
Is that channel reflecting velocity downstream such that if you leave it in place, you've got a velocity issue?
Yeah, we certainly, with a natural channel form, we can slow the velocities down and make the downstream sections more stable.
Councillor Whaley.
Yeah, it's a significant rehab with a really big bill attached to it, that's for sure, for a 2.5 kilometer stream. I see most of the money comes out of 2019 capital dollars. Does that mean that you'll only begin then? And is this a 1 year or a couple construction season build?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley. So we had always planned to start construction in 2018, and there was funds that came in prior to 2019, but we still need to release the funds for the 2019 capital forecast. So we do plan on starting construction by the end of 2018 and going into 2019. So that was the message that was given when we were doing our PICs into the community for when we were doing our outreach.
So it can be done by the end of 2019, it'll be done?
Yes.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Burke, and thank you both for the work that's gone into this. I know that the folks in Reach 3 were people that I talked to a couple of times with Jessica, and I know that staff of various ilks that have had Jessica's role have spoken to them over the years, and I can imagine that they are quite happy that we'll be able to start proceeding on this. The one question I had that didn't show up in the report, which was very detailed on capital costs, and I know you have considered operating costs as part of the matrix for evaluation, but can you give me a sense of what the difference in operating this new system might look like in comparison to the system we have now? And I ask out of the broader view that I think we're trying to take of aligning the capital program with understanding its operating impacts, so that we're accounting for both when we get into budgeting in 2019 and 2020.
Sure. Through you, Chair Burke, Councillor Henry. So operating costs will probably look fairly similar to what they are now. The stormwater management areas specifically, we do a yearly inspection of those, and then we've been doing in the last number of years assessments on our stormwater ponds to see where the sediment levels are sitting to determine when we need to do cleanouts. So that will look very much the same as it does now. In terms of creek inspection, a lot of the times it's driven by, we've had a storm and they'll go check to see if there's any debris buildups or debris jams, or if somebody calls our operations crew to go out and take a look at the creeks, and we go out and clean that out. So it'll be fairly similar to what we do now. There's not going to be any increase in operational costs associated with Maple Hill Creek.
Well, that's useful to hear, and Councillor Freeman took my, part two, question. I mean, from reviewing the comments, I was able to pop into a session or two. I can't remember how many I was able to make it out to, but the characterization of residents being highly engaged, a lot of them present and offering detailed, comments and very thoughtful comments and good insights into how their properties were functioning, and good back and forth. Sounds like what I saw as well, and from reviewing the comments from PIC3, the only area where there might be some modest divergence is in the first stormwater pond in terms of the exact way that it stores water relative to natural plants. But overall, I think the fact that you only got 9 comments out of the 26 that were there suggests most people were fairly happy with what they saw.
Yeah, so through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Henry, just to speak to that as well. So obviously there's a pretty long history with some of the residents on Maple Hill Creek, especially in the areas where we're seeing property loss in the rear yards. So there was a lot of public communication done, and we went out a number of times to the specific sites. But in Reach 3 specifically, we've done a ton of communication, and they were very happy with the outcome of the EA at the end of the day. And we got a big thank you from them for putting that in. So, fingers crossed we get it through regulatory agencies and everything goes the way that we'd like to. And as Jeff spoke about, we did meet specifically with Reach 4 and Reach 5 residents, and we did a kitchen table meeting at one of their homes. And Jeff and I went out and spoke at length with them about their specific concerns related to Reach 4 and Reach 5. And I stayed well into the evening and walked the entire stretch with all of the residents to make sure that they understood where we were going, what direction the project was going in, and really what the constraints were and what we could work with and what we couldn't. And I think at the end of the day, they did have a good understanding. And since then, we really haven't had any negative feedback.
And that's very useful to hear. And I think residents very much appreciate when they've got such high touch staff that are available to really walk them through the fine details and know that they've been heard, that they understood, and they know what to expect. So that midway through construction, we shouldn't get too many calls about. But I thought it was going to be the exact opposite of what you're doing. So I appreciate the amount of work that you're putting into this at the front end. Hopefully that will help us through construction.
And we will continue to do that communication through construction and talk to specific homeowners that are backing onto the sections of the creek that we plan on doing construction.
Any further questions? We're looking for someone to move this along. Councillor Henry so does. Councillor Freeman seconds it. Any further discussion? All those in favor? The very non-sexy work involved in the city sometimes. Non-sexy and expensive. We are going to move along to the first of our informal public meetings. We have 2 post office public meetings tonight. Here's hoping we can deliver. Now, we will not be putting our stamp of approval. Sorry. Just had to let her go. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 7A, Official Plan Amendment number 18, and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1802, Canada Post Corporation at 70 King Street North. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and the staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. And if there is more than one registry, and there is tonight, please ensure you are signing the appropriate one. The planner will now provide a brief overview of this application.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair Burke, Mayor Jaworski, councillors, and ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to note on the agenda, this is noted as Official Plan Amendment 18, and before us tonight, it's been renumbered, so before us tonight is Official Plan Amendment number 21 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1802, both of which apply to 70 King Street North. The subject property is located on the east side of King Street, south side of Bridgeport Road, and west side of Regina Street, so 3 street frontages. And the lands are approximately 0.46 hectares in size. The lands contain a low-rise building which was previously occupied and currently owned by Canada Post Corporation, and there's a surface parking lot in behind the building. To the north of the property, beyond Bridgeport Road, is a 2.5-story multi-unit mixed-use building that fronts onto King Street, and in behind that is a 3-story apartment or condominium dwelling unit or building, excuse me. And further up King Street is commercial uses, and then behind the Bridgeport side of things is low-rise residential buildings. To the east of the property is, and beyond Regina Street, is a 4-story mixed-use building. And beyond that are low-rise residential uses, some of which, particularly along Bridgeport Road, have been either partially or completely converted into commercial uses. To the south of the property, again, is that mix of commercial and low-density residential uses. Along Princess Street, we do have a few of the existing single-detached dwellings that are used for dwellings and some that have been converted for commercial purposes. There's a mixed-use building, which contains commercial and office uses, as well as a 3-story multi-unit dwelling at the corner of Princess and Regina Street. And finally, to the west, beyond King Street, is again a mix of low and medium density residential uses. And within that block, there is a 8-story apartment building at the corner of, along Princess Street. The official plan designates 70 King Street as commercial, and more specifically, Uptown Commercial Core. These designations contemplate a broad range of uses, including commercial, employment, entertainment, institutional, residential uses. The lands are also within the Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center, or primary node, which is designated to accommodate a minimum density of 200 people and jobs per hectare. A portion of the lands are designated Main Street, which permits a height between 6 meters and 16 meters. And the remainder of the site is designated high density, which permits up to 81 meters. The overall density is a maximum of 750 bedrooms per hectare. Both Bridgeport Road and King Street are designated regional arterial roads, whereas Regina Street is a minor collector, as well as citywide cycling and multi-use route. The current zoning of the property is commercial 8, 25 stories, which permits again a wide variety of uses, including residential above the first story. There are 3 site-specific bylaws that are applicable to the property. 05066 restricts the height of the building within 30 meters of King Street to 14 meters. And 026 and 027, which were adopted in 2017, permit new commercial uses in the commercial and general business zones and clarified zoning permissions for outdoor patios, all within the Uptown Waterloo Urban Growth Center. Since submitting their application, the applicant has made some changes to their application as well as the development, which are both reflected in this rendering. The proposed development consists of a mixed-use building containing 321 units or 367 bedrooms within the 2 towers. There's over 1,100 square meters of amenity space, interior and exterior to the building, over 4,000 square meters of non-residential space located within floors 1 through 5 along the King Street frontage, and a 255 square meter restaurant is proposed on the ground floor closest to the King Street and Bridgeport Road intersection. And the rest of the non-residential space is devoted to launch, which can be described as incubator space for youth interested in science, technology, engineering, arts and design, and math, or the STEAM program. I understand that the applicant and his planner will be providing a presentation following mine and will be providing additional detail in regards to that use. As illustrated by this cross-section, physically the building will consist of a 4 to 6 story podium. The 4 stories is facing King Street, the 6-story portion is facing Regina Street. And The additional stories or the change in those stories is primarily due to the change in elevation, with King Street being at the highest point and Regina Street being at the lowest point. The residential uses, as I noted, are contained within the 2 towers shown here in yellow. Tower A will be a height of 11 stories, and that's inclusive of the podium, for a total of 45.65 meters. And Tower B will be a height of 24 stories, or 79.25 meters. The amenity space, as shown again in green here, is primarily on top of the podium, as well as within floors 12 and 13, which is an interior space that will physically link the 2 towers. The non-residential space is shown here in pink, and the parking makes up the rest of the building, shown here in blue, which is generally behind the non-residential space and consisting of 6 stories above ground and not quite 2 full stories below ground. The applications to facilitate this development will include an amendment to the official plan to increase the permitted height within the Main Street designation from 16 to 46 meters, as well as to add site-specific provisions to the existing Commercial 8 zoning to increase the building height again within 30 meters of King Street from 14 to 46 meters, to increase the building height on the remainder of the property to 81 meters, measure residential density in buildings per hectare, increase the maximum density from 750 bedrooms per hectare to 800 bedrooms per hectare, use private indoors and rooftop decks as contributing to their overall amenity area, as well as reduce the parking requirements from 1 space per unit to 0.8 spaces per unit for the residential component, and from 2.15 spaces per 100 square meters down to 1.48 spaces per 100 square meters for the non-residential component. In terms of, as I said, the density portion is proposed to increase, and those additional bedrooms will be, the applicant is wishing to utilize the density bonusing provisions within the official plan in exchange for community benefits. And staff will certainly be considering the density bonusing provisions and its relative impact on road infrastructure, parking, and any other aspects as I say, in exchange for those community benefits. Several studies and plans have been submitted in support of this application. We will be working with the applicant in the coming weeks to obtain revisions to some of these studies in light of the changes that have been made to the application. And in terms of next steps, again, as I say, staff will be working with the applicant to obtain those revisions to the studies. We'll be reviewing those studies, considering feedback from council, the public, our stakeholders and other public agencies, and then we'll be preparing a report with staff recommendations and present it at a formal public meeting in the future. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have to read this part first. Does any councillor have any questions for staff? Please remember, this is an informal public meeting, and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members, as much as it may hurt, should not express opinions at this point. On that note, Councillor Whaley.
My question is, are you kidding me? Thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions. I'm trying to understand there's a 14-meter height limitation on buildings facing King Street, and the big zone change request is, of course, going to 46 meters. I have a couple of questions around that. First of all, is that 46 meters from the podium or 46 meters from the ground?
I'm wondering if I can go back. So the 46 meters is measured from the base of the building right up to including Tower A. So it is within that, as I say, that Main Street.
So the podium, the 4-story podium is included in that 46 meters. And then the building steps back, and I'm not clear on the picture, and I haven't been able to estimate what that setback might be. Do you have any ideas how much that setback would be from the 4-meter podium to the 14-story tower?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Willie, no, I'm sorry, I don't have that particular measurement. It may be a detail that the applicant will be able to address for you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to staff at this point? Okay, thank you. I will now ask the registered delegations to come forward. The first of those is Scott Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some books to distribute to members of council, if I might, with the clerk. Thank you. So I got to say, I've done a lot of informal and formal public meetings, and this one probably excites me the most. We've spent a lot of time. The importance of this site in terms of a gateway into uptown from the universities, from the expressway, the opportunity to envision roughly an entire city block within the uptown of Waterloo made this a special exercise for us. This wasn't just a normal project. We do a lot of good projects that I would say are normal projects. For us, we tried to elevate this one to be a community building exercise. And that's the lens that me and my partners took when we started to think about what could happen. Our involvement in the site dates back almost 5 years now when Canada posted an RFP and we were the successful respondents. And since that time, we've observed needs within the city, changes within the city, and tried to think a little more objectively on how our role as a leading developer, a group of people that have spent our lives here, our families have spent their lives here, our friends are here, our businesses are here, what we might be able to do a little more special than the norm. And so I'm happy tonight to present what our vision is for this site. So we started to look at, and maybe I'll take a quick sidebar. This stemmed from a trip I took to Vancouver with my wife Jennifer and our 2 kids. We had launched a project in Cambridge called the Gaslight District, and we saw the power of a community coming together on an arts and culture focus to really do something quite remarkable, which is celebrate culture. And we thought that was getting missed in the Cambridge market. So I was tired after that launch. It was a big party. It was a great success. We went out to Vancouver and visited some friends. And I didn't take a phone. We're walking around Falls Creek, and I decided to take the kids to the Science Center, right at the end of Falls Creek. And I'm walking around the Science Center with Marcus and Charlotte, and I started thinking, where's our Science Center? We're a vibrant community here. We have great research institutions, great teaching institutions, an unbelievable culture in growing technology startups. We do a lot of promotion and PR around that. What are we doing to engage a 3-year-old, my daughter Charlotte, a 7-year-old, my son Marcus? We're not doing enough. And I left with that impression. And as I walked that space, it was a space of exploration. It wasn't your typical science center. It was a place to have fun, engage as a community, dream, play. And I came back with the idea that we need something like that in Waterloo. So that was the root of sort of the idea. It was just a personal experience walking into the Science Center and having some fun in Vancouver and thinking about how we as a city and we as a region could really use that place to start to celebrate. The other thing we then researched is really the definition of a world-class community is changing. And I liken that to, we started to look at places like Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas, probably number 1 on the list for Amazon's consideration of where to go. That would never have been the case 15 or 20 years ago. You would have gone to a big city with great infrastructure, great resources. Why are they looking at Austin? Because it had a cool vibe. It had a keep it weird philosophy. It had declared itself the live music capital of the world, like an audacious statement. You weren't, probably not, but you said you were, and you started to create that vibe. And it's those types of cultural things that people gravitate towards. Young people want to be a part of. They've got great academic institutions there. They had a hard time keeping people in that community to stay. Sounds a lot like home. Mid-sized city, great institutions. If 10% of the people that go to University of Waterloo stay, we're in good shape. That can't be our strategy long term, and it's worked, but these other centers started to focus on those culture building things and putting a parental statement to it and getting young people to want to live there, to be proud to be from there, and just to kind of be weird and different, and great ideas come from that. So Austin was one example. Pittsburgh was another. I mean, they decimated in the 70s through 90s, lost a third of their population with steel and coal. You go down to Pittsburgh now, and it's Uber's head office, Google, great presence, autonomous vehicles everywhere, the Carnegie Mellon University Robotics Division, kind of stepped up and the community came together, but it was this culture building thing. Pittsburgh's a really cool place. Detroit's going through a similar renaissance right now. Hamilton, as a local example, is kind of doing it too. We have to start doing those culture initiatives. So we said, if world-class success is a result of human creativity, born from and driven by culture, then we have an opportunity in front of us. We have a great creative class here. We've got great entrepreneurship. We've got great institutions. We've got great people. So we started to think we need to do what Austin did. We need a parental statement as a region to stand up and say we're something. And we arrived on this. We believe we're the creative capital of Canada. Well, I'm going to yell this from the mountains, and I hope a whole bunch of people start yelling it too. We can't be so tech focused. I think, if you design furniture, you cook food, you play music, you're in technology, you're just creative. It's that creativity that's going to matter long term within our kids. We see it in the school system starting to change. But if I could give my kids two things, I would say be confident and be creative. And with those two things, whatever you study, whatever you do, you're going to be successful. And I think we need to champion that type of culture within this region. And I think it can manifest itself in a place. And I'm going to get to that. Don't get stuck on the branding. It's just an idea. And Austin said we're the live music capital of the world. We can do a lot of cool stuff by calling ourselves the creative capital of Canada. We can't just rely on academic institutions to bring people here. We need to find a way where people resonate to come to our community. And I think if you look back at San Francisco's success, that was a great academic institution that had hippies and a bunch of gay people. And look what happened. They just said we're an open culture. We support that openness. We support creativity. In fact, we embrace it. And it's no secret that that type of ecosystem and infrastructure led to what it led to. It's that level of creativity that can do some pretty special things. So then we said, okay, that's great. You want to build a creative culture. It's already here. We want to echo it and build on that. How do we do that? And my roots were in minor hockey. And I started to look at that system, that minor system of supporting talent. Community engagements, coaches, mentorship, programming, youth involved. Right at 3 years old, we start to build that culture. And look at the success. We're a small country on the global stage, and we became the best in the world at something. Unquestioned best in the world. En masse best in the world. We did that. And we didn't do it because there was something in the water. We did it because the Canadiana culture created it. And I make the joke, if you were the mayor of a small town and you had to build your first things, you'd build a city hall, and then you'd build a school, and then you'd build a hockey arena. And you'd use the ambulance from the town over. You'd go to the hospital from the town over, but by golly, our kids are going to play in our own hockey arena. That's how deep this culture is driven in the hockey culture. But you know what? It works. It gives the kids that programming. It gives the kids that structure. It gets the community involved. And then what it does is start to identify your outliers. Just some examples, Krautline people know. The one I like is PK Subban. Their parents immigrated here from Jamaica, went to Sudbury. Okay, they didn't skate, they didn't know hockey at all. And they enrolled their kids, 3 boys, in hockey because that's what you do in Sudbury. And now all 3 of those kids play in the NHL. That's not one kid's talent. That's a culture that led to that. And in a short period of time. So that's a powerful example of how rooting that at a young age and supporting it can lead to great success. So, with that, I said, where's our minor association then for creativity? And right now, I find math camps, I find science camps, I find art class, I find music lessons. I chase this stuff for my kids because I want to give my kids that creative component of thinking, but that's hard to do as a parent with a young family. Whereas in minor hockey or minor soccer or minor baseball, I simply enroll them in a season. That season comes with programming, engagement, mentorship activity. It makes it easy for parents who might not be inclined. It's easy to get a parent to enroll their kid in STEM if their parents are in STEAM, if their parents are already in STEAM. It's difficult to get their parent who doesn't think like that to put their kid in it because they don't know where to go. They don't have their place. And so we said, you know what, part of this idea is we should establish the Waterloo Region Minor STEAM Association. we should make this a literal example of how we do it in a minor sports culture. I'm not talking about athletics. I'm not talking about putting all the kids in athletics. I'm talking about mirroring a structure that produces great things, great culture in a very easy way for parents to get engaged. We have great STEAM providers in the community doing wonderful things, except they're in church basements, industrial areas, 1 week long camp, 1 day event. We don't make it easy to have that consistent programming, that enrollment. We also don't put them on a team. And I make this joke, but I tell you what, minor sports teaches kids a lot of things. They have support. They have a support network, non-gender specific. They play and have fun as a team. They learn competition. They win and lose together. These are powerful tools that athletics teaches children that we're not teaching them in other types of disciplines. And it just shows how great that wide community can be. We have donors, we have volunteers, we have coaches. I'm not talking now about just programming and feeding kids programming. You know, parents get to know each other. They get involved. I give 15 hours a week to coach my kids hockey. Other parents would get involved to teach their kids and other kids and mentor those skills. Then it starts to build a deep network of people that are just supporting each other. You know, they build a social network. They build a wide community engagement. The other thing that the hockey culture does is it identifies your outliers early. At 7, 8, 9 years old, you start to see kids that are excelling. That same thing exists within technical capabilities of STEAM. We're just not finding it young enough. We go to girls in high school, which is great, and we say get involved in STEAM. It's too late. They're sort of shaped. It's very difficult to make that change. We have to do it much younger. But when we do it much younger, you're going to have little Sarah, little Johnny show aptitude in something. And you're going to tap them on the shoulder and say, we want you to come up to the travel team. We want you to take a non-age-based space and let that kid dream and explore and give them the mentorship and coaching that maybe their parents can't give them. Maybe those early volunteers can't give them. But we can liaise with our tech community, liaise with our arts community, liaise with our design community, and have them be the coaches and mentors of the kids showing higher aptitude. The power of that is pretty phenomenal. I think we're going to produce some of the next biggest things because we're going to identify those outliers so much earlier than come to our universities and stick around. No, our culture is going to make them, and our system is going to support them such that they achieve great things right here at home. So I said if creativity is our sport, and that's the type of culture that's going to lead to the future success, then it's time for us to build our arena. And so we've coined the facility Launch, and some of this early branding stuff will still evolve. But Launch is the arena of creativity. It is the place. And if I quickly say what I envision, ground floor, you come in, think of going, to the museum. You have admissions, you have a restaurant, you have something creative that catches your eye, you have a gift shop, you have those types of things. You come up to the second floor, and on the second floor, we need to have a whimsical play space. So this second floor space would be your science center, your inspiration place, a place for the community to come and have fun, date night, just like going to the museum and having a good time. On the third floor, if we're going to build that lineage and that culture, we need to find our Sidney Crosbys, we need to find our Wayne Gretzkys, we need to find our Mario Lemieux. We need to hold up those that are achieving great success in our community and find a way for them to showcase themselves to the entire community. What happens in Perimeter? Lots of cool stuff. How many people know about it? Not that many. I know Toby's here tonight with the quantum exhibit, which is great. It's starting to have quantum engage at a broader level, but I tell you, those are early days still. Not that many people know about that. These are world-renowned things that are happening, and we need to have a place where we can showcase that. The community doesn't go find it. It's too hard. Maybe a great celloist comes into Perimeter and you want to hear them play. That's 2% of the population. We need kids to understand the magnitude of the things that are happening here. Thelmic Labs, great technology. We need to hold them up as a Sidney Crosby of innovation and champion that and show that a 10-year-old that those successes are right here in our backyard. It can be such a powerful tool to get the design and technology firms and institutions to engage in a place that's fun. And then you go up to the third floor, fourth floor, and we have the labs. We have the arena creativity. We have the WR STEAM minor sports type of reference. And then on the fifth floor, we have the co-lab space, the tapped on the travel team come up for the for the greater investment in time and mentorship and learning. So we build that whole structure just like we would build it in a sport.
Scott, I feel bad.
Yeah.
Because I'm interrupting your evangelical zeal, and I appreciate it. But we are well over time here.
Okay, I'll
so I can get you to...
Yeah, no problem. So this is the space, right? A place to make, innovate, and celebrate. Just give you an idea of what that space. So that space happens in the front, 2 residential towers in the back, parking in the rear, and something just architecturally hasn't been done. So we want to really do something pretty special that makes a statement in the north end of Waterloo to showcase that. I touched on this. This is just our perspective. Look, we're from here, so we're trying to do something more than just a real estate project with this one. We're pretty passionate about how to engage with the community, invest in the community, and do something special. And we're not going to do it alone, so we got lots of partners that want to come in and help us do it. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions from council to this delegation? Councillor Whaley.
Well, it's so interesting to be at an informal public hearing about an official plan amendment, and for a big-time developer to come here and spend over his allotted time talking about this passionate aspect and hardly even mention the building. Pretty incredible stuff. But I want to ask a couple questions about the building. So earlier, the planner talked about the uptown zoning and what it contemplates in terms of use. And she mentioned, I tried to write them down and I'm sure there's more. She mentioned retail. She mentioned entertainment, commercial, institutional, and residential. Are you telling me you want to have all those uses in one building?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, is it cool? Can we ask that question? Okay. That's interesting. We'll ask a planner later if there's any other examples of such a broad mixed use. That'll be interesting. But we do have to ask you a little bit about that imposing 46-meter front wall, because the community is going to be interested in that, Scott.
Yep. That's
a huge change in our uptown core. And I know that the podium is, the podium, go back to the last picture. Yeah, so the podium is 4 stories high. It looks like it blends right in. And then the setback is what makes sense to me, that there's a setback that kind of breaks it all up and gives you a sense of a walker that it is only 4 stories. But how far back can that setback actually be for you to win the community over on the building? Not the idea of launch. It's a remarkable, I've never seen such, passionate presentation. But how far back can that be to make this potentially work?
Yeah. So Trevor, we looked for residential density respecting the height restriction in the official plan. So the driver here was the back tower should comply. We're trying to approach our projects with the least amount of variances as we can. That's been a common theme and decision of council, so we're trying to respect that position. So we took the back tower up to the maximum height permitted in the OP, and then we had a certain level of residential requirement to make the investment viable, and so that's what derived then the front tower. We did try to make it as low as we can. Trevor from MHBC, who's going to give a presentation following me, has some visuals on what that streetscape looks like. So the idea is to break it at a 4-story height condition, step that tower back, step it back enough that the pedestrian realm feels and notices the 4-story condition. Certainly as you pull away, maybe you're driving down King or down Bridgeport, you'll see the scale above, but in the pedestrian realm, we want it to be very sensitive with making a feeling be 4-story. The limitation is then how much separation minimum do you need between towers on how far you can pull that front tower back. Is 18 meters comfortable? Is 16 meters comfortable? Is 15 meters comfortable? And then just getting the structural alignment of those towers to then work with the underground parking. So these are always a bit of a jigsaw that starts to happen on how you fit those pieces together. But our mindset is still, how do we create enough separation that at the pedestrian realm you're not facing a wall, you're facing a 4-story condition, and it's stepped back far enough that it goes away. You don't feel it as an imposing structure over your head.
Councillor Gore.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Burke. The architecture is really interesting. It almost looks like the building's wearing a skirt. Can you talk a little bit about the idea behind this and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, the idea behind it is find great design people and get out of the way. So we engaged Martin Simmons Architects on this project because we think they're the best in the region at design. And we went through several iterations on what it should be. We had very tech examples. We wanted to create a wow factor on King. We wanted to create it on Bridgeport, and we wanted to create it as you come up Bridgeport. So even the addition of the upper bridge section between the towers and wrapping the glass component down Bridgeport and around Regina was on purpose because we thought a lot of people are going to see this thing coming from the expressway. They're not just going to see it from King Street, so we wanted to make those investments. The other thing is we didn't want to make it so techy. We didn't want this thing to be like, this is a science center, and then it loses its long-term appeal because it might be too out there. What we wanted is to have great architecture, great design, and have it still be very elegant. We wanted lots of glass. In this case, there's some treatment within the glass, but we wanted that wow factor where at night when it illuminated, you see the activity inside. You want to go in there. Part of the reference, was a little bit in CG and some of the stuff that if you get great lighting inside and you drive by, you can't help but notice what's going on in there. But really it was how do you do a showpiece, pedestrian scale, and make it timeless, really, is what we're trying to do here.
Talk to me about the mix between, obviously there'll be very different people in the Science Center than will be living on top. So how do you balance that?
So we have an entrance on Regina, we have an entrance on King, and we have an entrance to the commercial unit. So the residential entrances, residential lobbies, and accesses don't cross over. The parking, there's 2 parking accesses on Regina. Again, one for the center and one for the residents. So we've been able to segregate traffic movement for residential and pedestrian access for residential. And then we have an amenity level on that podium, and then the residential towers go up from there. And this isn't going to be, a kid's playground. This is still very much, in our minds, a date night and engagement from the community. So while I'm focused on some of the culture things to encourage kids to get involved in STEAM, the facility itself is going to be multifaceted such that right from 2 years old to 92 years old, this is a place for you. This is a place to celebrate creativity and come have a bit of fun. But we have segregated the lobbies and the access points to keep it. And I think, when you live in an area now, you're going to want that urban experience. So, the vibrancy of what might happen below is actually why you live in Uptown or why you live in downtown Kitchener. And so those that come into the building are looking for that energy anyways. This isn't, I need it to be deathly quiet with no activity around me. That's not why you move to Uptown, in my view anyways.
Well, I hope so, yes. I guess quite a few of the technical questions, because I'm wondering a little bit about what this building looks like from different aspects. So obviously we're looking at it sort of top down, but for people who are standing on the street looking up, that's one of the things I'm curious about. Also Regina Street, I haven't really seen that look. Regina's it's starting to rejuvenate, but at this point there's still some work to do on it. So I want to make sure that we're, whatever is on that side looks good. And
there's a full lobby. So the streetscape there's 2 parking entrances, but the balance is a commercial unit on the corner of Bridgeport and Regina.
Okay.
That we actually plan to give away for free to some creative initiative. So we're talking about how to, it's 1,500 feet, but we do have a commercial component right at the corner. And then there's a full residential lobby. So probably almost 2/3 of the frontage on Regina is an active use in a residential lobby and a retail space. And then you have the parking entrances.
Okay.
So we have tried to focus on how we make that. The uniqueness is we have 2 front doors. And really, so how do we make both be a vibrant place on the pedestrian?
Yes, I guess you've experienced from that because you went through that on Circa too. It was
we got 2 front doors.
Right.
We like
the double doors, yeah.
Any other questions from Councilor for this? Councilor Freeman.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess my question is that when I try to focus on zoning, I feel like I'm being asked to focus on a science center instead of zoning, and so if you want me to focus on a science center, it would be helpful for me to understand how will the sustainability of that space be maintained and what's Plan B?
Yeah. So with that, we've had several meetings already with large community stakeholders and partnering on the idea. So the sustainability question isn't fully answered yet. For us, it was important to put the idea forward and find those community partners. We've had several meetings with some of the institutional partners and also some large technology companies to come in. So we envision this being a collaborative effort of those leading the community on STEAM to get engaged and create this space. The uniqueness of a minor association brings an active pay stream that doesn't exist in a museum. So there's a different funding model that can be achieved with this facility that isn't normal for a science center or museum type operation, but valid point, you're getting there. The planning side, Trevor's up next. I asked to go first. So he's going to speak to the technicalities of the zoning. This isn't just a bit of smoke and mirrors. So Trevor's coming up to go through the variances being requested. I just made the presentation first. Plan B is it's one, I'm the type of person that I don't really like Plan B because I work tirelessly to make Plan A work. Plan B this is just office plates. So if it had to go back to something, this is conventional office plates. We were in negotiations with a large law firm to come into this space, and when I got back from Vancouver, I didn't want to do it. I just said, we got to do something better than that on this site. And so it's functionally designed to work as office space. Long term, it could be converted back to office space. Parking ratio is good, lobbies are good, access is good. All of that has been thought through. So there is a plan B. We're just going to make sure plan A works. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Burke, and thank you, Scott, for coming up. This is certainly an unusual way of presenting to council in the time that I've been here in terms of the applicant coming up and expressing vision, and then we'll go back to the technical details. And without commenting on the application before me, I can comment on approach. I think it's helpful for council and any member of the public looking to understand where a proposal is coming from and have that be an understanding of how we consider those impacts rather than black boxes and step backs and these kinds of things that can get overly technical and nitty gritty and doesn't allow you to really sink your teeth into what you're really considering. So I appreciate that you've done that. And so in that vein, I'm going to ask different questions than I normally would at this stage. You've talked a lot about the vision of what you see the region being, what you see the opportunity of this structure and development being, and at the same time, this is a development that isn't just it isn't just a regional development, which we always appreciate when regional developments happen in Waterloo. That's a good balance for the region. But this is also happening in a specific place and in a specific context. So you've talked about your vision for what you would put in here, but can you step back for a second and tell me, what you see when you walk King Street in Uptown Waterloo? What do you see as the surrounding context of the community?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I don't know how I want to answer. I see a history that needs to be maintained and important. I like the 4-story step back condition. I think that at this end, at the north end, this almost exhausts where what people would view as Uptown Waterloo sort of ends or close to ends. I think the building fabric that exists along the core is worthy of investment and protection. So I get the policy, and we wouldn't be advocating for that exception mid-block in Uptown. When I pull back, as we look at it from a developer, I think we have a unique opportunity in Waterloo to envision what our city may become. I think we're a town, and I'm from here. I'm from Cambridge, and I think Cambridge is a town. I think we have a unique opportunity over the next 20 years to define what we want to be as a city. We are a great city, but we're still really small, and growth is coming, and it's coming in a pretty significant way. And I think that's a massive opportunity to craft the visual example of the city, the use of a city, the creativity of a city. I get jacked for that because that's rare. If we were a developer in Toronto, we're adding one small piece to a very big city. The ability to impart change is quite difficult. In Waterloo, in Cambridge, in Kitchener, to a certain extent, you have much greater opportunity to work and craft that vision. So, I see the city intensifying. I see the city growing up in certain areas with additional building height and people and bringing a vibrancy to the street. I think that you're going to need to do that to have the critical density required to sustain great creative commercial businesses in the uptown. So I see growth and I see scale. I think you have to be smart about where that goes. I think the investments in transit are going to assist with that. I think those were done on purpose. We certainly took our cue from those investments on where we might place our investments. But that would be, I'm not an advocate for bulldoze at all. No, I think there's a lot of great history that needs to be preserved and protected, but I think scale is coming and we have to put it somewhere, and we shouldn't be scared of big dreams or big things in the right areas, because I think those are going to be exciting projects for a cityscape long term.
I think some of that's helpful to understand where you're coming from and how you see this site in the broader context of a larger policy regime. I appreciate some of the comments you made earlier as well around pedestrian scale versus when you pull back and maybe you're driving in or you're coming from it at scale. I think that's something that will, I imagine, we'll be looking to as we evaluate the proposals in its normal course, and just understanding that context that you're creating. The other question I have for you is target market. Councillor Durrell spoke that the people upstairs will be different than the people downstairs in terms of what happens, and that's maybe not the Downton Abbey perspective of what I would mean by up and down, but I noticed that the unit mix and the unit sizes changed substantially from the proposal that I read online to the proposal I see that's now up online in the same space. You had a much larger mix of 2 beds as a proportion, and of a substantial size in terms of square footage for those units. So things that looked about the size of my 3-bed unit in another building, and I thought that was interesting and different from what I had been seeing. Can you talk about that shift in this proposal from what was originally submitted in the application, and B, more broadly, who you see as your target market, upstairs and downstairs?
Yeah, no, and it's a valid point. I think we struggle with housing choice in the market. So originally we tried to do some bigger units and some greater housing choice. I think the natural outcome of a bedrooms per hectare policy encourages the development community to look hard at 1 bedrooms as a means to achieve density. 2, we have retailed, so the condominium market struggles to pay the price point needed to pull off the project when you get too big a unit. I think we're following Toronto's example. I think that changes long term, by the way. I think it goes small and then comes back and goes big. But right now, if we were to stand up and try to retail 100 larger 2-bedroom or 2-bedroom plus product, the price point goes beyond what even a single family house trades at a block back from uptown or within a subdivision. So there's not an undercurrent of demand that is willing to purchase 6, 7, 800,000 condominium to get that space. So what we're finding is the demand in the market, both for rental and for sales, tends to be the more economical unit. And in this case, we wanted to have, how do we have housing available in the high 200s, low 300,000s? How do we have that level of affordability serve a condominium market, or serve a rental market for that matter? And the reality is, with costs the way they are, that leads you to smaller units. We're going to stay focused long term on how we still find projects for housing choice. I think right now we're looking to try to find a 20 or 30 unit boutique condo project that has some bigger units. But I think once you go to scale, to put up a for sale sign and say I've got 200 units for sale and I have to sell 70% in order to get financing, I can't sell enough 2 and 3 bedroom units at the price point needed to make the project viable. Those buyers aren't there right now. I do think they're going to be there long term. And I would like to provide more housing choice in our projects, but right now the demand and the math and the policy leads you to a heavier 1-bedroom mix. And so in terms of the people moving in, it's still a wide cross-section moving into our building. So you get a big swath, in the Belmont Village stuff in our 1-bedrooms, it was probably 70% seniors that were actually in our 1-bedroom product that moved into that. We'll get a mix in this building. You'll have right from young professionals, through to empty nesters. But we're not building yet a lot of larger family units because of the inability to retail them at a profitable price point when they get too big. We're going to keep trying, though.
Any further questions? None? Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
We will move on to Trevor Hawkins. Trevor?
Thank you, Julie. Mayor Jaworski, members of council, I'm pleased to be here tonight to present the project at 70 King Street North. You've heard a lot about it already. I'll try and cut through a little bit quickly. So Wendy gave us a little bit of context in the surrounding area. Verbally, I'll just give a little bit more visual context. So we have the project at Bridgeport, King Street, Regina, so fronting onto 3 streets. Some of the surrounding projects, Wendy mentioned the building at 14 Princess Street at Princess and DuPont, 8-story building recently constructed, mixed-use building. We have a 4-story building across the street on the east side of Regina Street, also mixed use. The 2.5, 3.5, depending on where you're standing on the street, building across the street on the north side of Bridgeport. The 42, a 6-story building just down the street. And then as we go further north along King Street, we have the project at Elgin and King, which is a 15-story building. And then up at the top on Noecker Street or Knocker Street, depending on how you pronounce it, 22-story building, the K2. So as you can see, if we were to look at the same area context and we were at the opposite end of Uptown, we'd see there was quite a number of multi-story, 20, 18, 25-story buildings. And so this is what we're seeing now at the top end of Uptown, and then in between we have really the true core and the historic part of Uptown. This is just some images of what in case anyone hasn't walked past this building recently, this is what it looks like today. So I have the 2 shots at the top which show us what the building looks like if we were standing on King Street. So I'm looking south, looking north, here's the entrance. So it's a pretty plain looking, no offense to Canada Post, pretty plain looking 1-story building. And if we look at the back, I'm standing in the parking lot, which is currently a public parking lot. Again, it's a fairly ordinary looking building, and then a large part of the property is made up of surface parking spaces which have found reuse as a public temporary lot. We've seen some of the imagery of the elevations, and it's important that we note that the 3 streets are really addressed with this podium design, so it's not a matter of just addressing King Street and ignoring Bridgeport and Regina. The podium really wraps around the whole project and addresses all 3 streets. So if we really took a walk down King Street and Bridgeport and Regina today and visualized what's there now and what the street feels like, and then we imagine what it would feel like if this building were in place, I think we would agree it's a dramatic improvement. It's important that the podium on King Street, it's a 4-story podium, which is consistent with the OP. The official plan says 4 stories, 16 meters. This podium is 4 stories and 21 meters. It's really only 5 meters taller than what the official plan envisions for a large section of King Street. The podium is a little bit bigger on Regina Street, but a lot of that's due to grading, and as we go further into the site in Regina Street, we're looking at existing zoning that allows a 25-story, 75-meter tall building. As Scott noted, the main focus of King Street and the podium will be the STEAM office space. So almost 40,000 square feet of office space to activate King Street versus what we see there today. A dramatic improvement in terms of people coming and going from the building, what you can see on the building, and how the street will feel. The residential units, 321 units, 367 bedrooms. So the original proposal that Councillor Henry alluded to has been modified slightly with 32 more bedrooms. But the tower on King Street has been reduced by over 12 meters versus the original proposal. And the Regina Street tower is only 1 meter taller. So some changes were made to the design, recognizing the importance of King Street without really increasing the size of the building on Regina Street at all. Indoor and outdoor amenity space. So when we're looking at the zoning bylaw amendment, we're looking for the outdoor amenity space to count. There is a substantial amount of indoor amenity space which would already count towards the amenity requirement in the bylaw. Here's a site plan. I don't know that we've seen that yet, and Councillor Whaley was asking a number of questions about the step back. So if we took this section of King Street, we'd be looking at about a 7-meter step back between the actual face of the tower or of the podium, and I mean the physical ground level structure and the face of the tower. If we look at, you can see in the site plan the curved design, which we've seen in the elevations. If we incorporate that as part of the podium, which it really would feel like on the street, the step back becomes even greater. And you can see in locations here, there's a substantial setback. Could be as much as 8 to 9 meters. And then on Regina Street, we also have the curved design, again showing you that all three facades on the streets are treated. And similarly, the facade that faces south that you would see if you were driving up Regina Street or King Street is not going to be ignored either. This is a cross-section. Wendy showed this earlier, but really what it shows you is that this is the face of the building as opposed to the curved design, which would further accentuate that step back. But we do see there's a fairly substantial setback. It's an 11-story building, and then we have a step back on Regina Street as well, which really focuses the podium in activating those two streets. And similarly, if we could see this cross-section on Bridgeport, we'd see the same thing. What really is unique facing Bridgeport is this amenity space, which we saw in the elevation. So I'm driving up Bridgeport Street. Not only do I see the towers and the designed podium, but I see this unique amenity space that links the two towers, something we haven't seen before in Waterloo. In terms of the planning framework, which we eventually have to get to that, it's designated uptown commercial core. So again, we look at where this property is in the star, and it's surrounded by a number of properties with a similar designation. And this is where Waterloo expects to see the bulk of its growth and the widest range of uses. It's the primary node. It's where the highest density is planned for. It's where the province, through their planning tools, is expecting Waterloo to achieve its highest densities. The Main Street designation, which follows the band from King Street from William to Yonge, would allow up to 16 meters. Although the density is the same between the Main Street and the high density, which is the back portion of the property. So as I noted, the original request, which Councillor Henry alluded to, was for 58 meters. It's now 46 meters. And again, I want to reiterate that podium is 4 stories, which is what the official plan envisioned, and it's only 21.1 meters tall. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment, the property is zoned commercial A25, which allows a broad number of uses, and Wendy alluded to some recent site-specific bylaws which expand those uses, so that this particular application does not seek any new uses. All of the uses that would be envisioned in the building, be they residential or part of the launch program or restaurant or retail, they're all already permitted. They do not need to be permitted through this process. The applications really amount to performance standards. So again, the height, we'd be asking for 46 meters versus the 14 meters, which is in the 2005 site-specific bylaw, which predates the city's new official plan. A slight increase in the height to 81 meters, which is, again, consistent with the official plan, which allows 81 meters on the back half of the property. There is a floor area ratio regulation in the C8 zone, although it would hamper a development of this nature. So we're asking that density really be measured in bedrooms per hectare, and building massing be measured by setbacks and height as opposed to a floor area ratio. As I noted in the amenity space, we're asking that the rooftop amenity space, which is on the top of the podium, count towards that amenity space requirement, whereas the bylaw wouldn't currently allow that today. And then Wendy noted the parking requirement. So if we were to look at the new or the draft, the second version of the draft bylaw, this project overall would have a few extra spaces in terms of complying with that new bylaw. And then again, we're switching the density measurement from units per hectare, which is reflective of the older zoning, versus the new official plan measurement of bedrooms per hectare. A number of technical studies, which I'll summarize as best as I can. We submitted an environmental noise study, and really the noise was mostly related to road noise from the streets, as you would expect. Typical recommendations, noise mitigation based on Ontario Building Code, construction, and then warning clauses for the residential units. In terms of the transportation impact study, no road improvements are required. There's a number of signalized intersections in the area, and they were comprehensively reviewed. We note that there are numerous alternatives to using a vehicle if you wish to get around not only Waterloo, but Kitchener, Cambridge, and beyond. Services are adequate, or even more than adequate, to service the development. Stormwater actually, in terms of its quality, improves as a result of this project because we're eliminating that large surface parking lot. Wind conditions are suitable for the uses, both on the project in terms of its amenity areas and entrances, but also the sidewalks that the public would use around the building. We did do and submitted a shadow study for the city to review, which looked at all the different shadows between March, June, September, and December as per the city's guidelines. And the shadow impacts, as you can see in this one excerpt I've included, moves across the properties in the surrounding area fairly quickly. In terms of the hydrogeological and geotechnical, because of the underground parking structure, we submitted those studies to ensure that there's no negative impacts on the wells and that the underground structure can be supported without permanent dewatering, and it can be. So in conclusion, I think this project really implements a lot of the provincial policies that we see in the PPS, in the growth plan, the region's official plan, and the city's own official plan, where they're expecting a lot of development to occur. I think we use the term landmark building a lot, perhaps a little too freely, but I think this project is one of the first ones I've seen that really warrants that designation. It provides some unique space for future city builders as part of the launch program. It addresses all three streets, King, Bridgeport, and Regina, with a highly articulated and active podium and facade. It's really been designed as a pedestrian-focused building. It's transit supportive, so we're within walking distance of the ION stations as well as other transit routes. It's respecting the built form that Council's identified for the Main Street designation because of that 4-story podium and the step backs to the tower. And I think, not to be lost in all this, it does bring a lot more residents to the uptown who will be able to support the local businesses that are already operating. With that, Chair Burke, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Trevor, and we do have some questions. We will start with Councillor Beath.
Through you, Chair Burke, thank you, and good to see you again, Trevor. Maybe I should have asked the developer, but I'm wondering, are there going to be like the typical amenities that are in condos these days, like a party room, a gym, bike storage facility, those kind of things?
Through you, Chair Burke, I think it's fair to say this building goes beyond what would be a typical amenity area. There's a pool, there's outdoor terraces, there are indoor spaces, there's yoga spaces, fitness. There's quite a number of amenity areas.
Councillor Whaley.
I have a question for the delegate, but I also have a question for staff after when the time is appropriate. Your new team jersey seems to fit you well, Mr. Hawkins. If you could go back to the site plan slide, I'm interested in the distance between the towers. As you know, we have minimum distance between the towers legislation here at the city. Does this comply?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, in terms of the proposed requirements in the zoning bylaw, which I believe would be 20 meters, if I recall correctly. You can see, it's hard to tell, but the tower separation in this area is over 18 meters, and in this area it's almost 15 meters.
So you're going to be requesting relief from that zoning bylaw as well?
Well, through you, Chair Burke, that's not a regulation that exists in the bylaw today. It's a proposed regulation. It only exists in Northdale.
That's interesting to know. Okay, thank you, Trevor. And I'll answer a question of staff now. So, thank you, Ms. Fisher. With respect to the density bonusing that they just talked a little bit about, we haven't drilled down on it. I'm sure there's ample time between the informal and the formal public meeting to do so. The density bonusing whole issues up in the air here at the city as we move from one regime to the next. But I wonder, after hearing some of the presentation this evening, is there any contemplation from either side that the bonusing may apply to the public side of this building, the not-for-profit side of this building, so that the density bonusing can be used right in the very building itself?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, the density bonusing aspect of the project hasn't been confirmed at all in terms of the actual community benefits. The applicant at this point has indicated the remediation of the contaminated site as well as some community space within the building would contribute towards that community benefit, but it certainly would be further negotiated as part of the overall review of the application.
And next up is Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through Chair Burke. Hello, Mr. Hawking.
Hello.
So currently walking up Bridgeport beside the building that's there now, it's a heck of a slog. It's a bit of a hill. There's nothing to look at on that side. So explain to me, because it is very well used, what will people be seeing as they're walking up there? And I noticed in the shadow studies, there is a shadow on that side. So what sort of design elements can you put in place to brighten that space up?
Well, I think the site plan here will show us what you'll see along Bridgeport. So you can see the articulated facade. We'll have the commercial space that will wrap around the corner from King on to Bridgeport. And then we'll have another space on the corner of Bridgeport and Regina. So most of that space will be active space at grade. And you'll have the same podium treatment that you would have on King Street. The shadow actually will move past Bridgeport, for a fair chunk of the day. So you'd be, not as a result of this building would you be in shadow permanently on Bridgeport.
And talk to me a little bit about the cars that are coming in off of Regina Street, because that's the only access at this point.
Yes, that's correct, through you, Chair Burke. There's two access points I've highlighted here with arrows. One goes up and one goes down into the parking structure. So depending on which parking level you're accessing, you'd use one of those two entrances.
So are we looking at a wall along the side? You can't see where I'm pointing. So at the very bottom, the lowest blue arrow, as you go down, would there be a wall there?
Well, there would be a ramp leading into the underground structure. It's not going to be a giant wall at this point. Those are design details that we'll certainly be looking to resolve with the city through the site plan process. But as I said, it's not the intent of the building to ignore that south-facing facade. It's going to be given a high level of treatment just like the other facades, because it will be visible from Regina or King Street if you're moving up those streets.
And how close are you to Stark and Perry, the building next door? Is there, I see we're pretty close here. Is there?
Well, the tower here would be set back more than 5 meters.
Yeah, no, the actual side of the building. How close is it to the building next door?
In terms of a setback, it's fairly close. The bylaw allows 0. It is not at 0. It's more than 0.
It's more than 0. Okay. But we don't know how much, or just?
I don't have that exact measurement available here. It's something we can provide for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. One of the anticipated uses of this building is the active part, the sciencey part. If parents are dropping off their children or stuff like that, where might they do that in this area?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Mayor Jaworski, if they're dropping off, there is a lay-by area on Regina Street. There is, of course, a city parking lot across Kitty Corner at Bridgeport and Regina, which if they need to get out of their vehicle and walk their children over, they could use.
Thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke, I have a series of questions, if that's okay. Can I trouble you, please, to go back to your page that shows your site statistics, proposed versus required? So on this one here, I think it would be helpful to better understand, because I feel like you're also making reference to the comprehensive bylaw that's not been approved yet a bit when you answered some of the questions, like the question of Councillor Whaley's, saying that the podium separation is in the comprehensive, not current and Northdale, and so it would be helpful for me too to understand what is, like, how many bedrooms over are you looking to bonus for? I don't see that number here.
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman, Wendy noted it was 23 bedrooms extra beyond
23?
the permission.
Okay, I couldn't remember. Is the parking requirement really driving the height of the podium?
Well, the height of the podium, well, parking in Waterloo in terms of the water table is often dictated by having to park above grade. So the more spaces that you need to provide typically would dictate the more levels of parking structure you need to provide. Now, this particular development has underground parking as well and has attempted to maximize as much as they could provide without negatively impacting the water table. So it's certainly a blended approach as best as they could, but there is an element of the podium that is devoted to parking.
And the reason why I asked the question is I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not the podium on the Regina Street side would be substantially lower if the parking requirement were based primarily on the residential units versus commercial use. So maybe that's a question for when you come back, because I don't know, it feels like an awful lot of parking, and I worry about that. Especially when you look at that commercial space on King Street with the intended purpose to be this maker space, notwithstanding Plan B. So the other question I had was, with regard to setbacks, so I didn't see any amendments related to setbacks. Does that mean there is none?
That's correct.
So are they all zero setbacks right now? Okay. And then my other question was primarily with regard to, well, actually, there was another one. With regard to the lay-by on Regina Street, it would be helpful to understand in the future how that lay-by works related to cycling infrastructure. If we're going to call Regina a primarily alternate cycling route, lay-bys can be a really dangerous zone for that, so it would be really helpful to better understand how that relationship works. In terms of the pedestrian realm on Bridgeport, Regina, and King, I noticed in one of the renderings you made, you illustrated, whether it's there or not, I don't know, some landscaping on King Street, but I didn't see any landscaping on any of the other sides or features. And so just kind of understanding what that might look like, because I know that this council asked a lot of questions about landscaping when other applications have come to us, like the Red. I recalled a conversation around landscaping at the Red. And so I think I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Trevor. We have a couple of other registered delegations. First, KLG. And please, as you come up, your name and your municipality of residence for the record.
Okay. So do I just push the button to move it? I never know. The left one. Okay, all right. So my name is KLG, and I live at 88 Fountain Street in Waterloo. And I think we all have to agree this is a really beautiful, really creative project. I've learned so much more about it tonight. But unfortunately, the only thing that's wrong with it is its location. It's just not the right building for this location. And the reason is because it violates both our official plan and the comprehensive zoning bylaw, even the second revision of the bylaw. And I think that those violations mean that some other things that we have carried on, some other investments we have made, risk being threatened by this proposed development as it stands right now. And certainly for me as a resident and someone who lives and loves the uptown, this section of the official plan is really important to me because it talks about retaining uptown's sense of community, identity, and commercial vitality. And this is where you see under the architectural integrity, the skyline that's been mentioned several times tonight, that the minimum height of a building in here will be 6 meters or 2 full stories, and its maximum height will be 16 meters or 4 stories. And this is shown on the height and density map in the official plan. And if you've got really sharp eyes, you can see the building outlined in red dots just in between beside the black dots there. So it is, but you can clearly see on this map that part of it is designed to be 4 meters on King Street, whereas on the Regina side of it, it is 81 meters high. And I know at the time the official plan was being written that the Municipal Heritage Committee worked really hard to bring in measures that would encourage the conservation and adaptive reuse of the many very interesting heritage buildings along King Street. And this was one of those measures to ensure that there was not things to discourage the destruction, or encourage rather the destruction of that streetscape. And that vision of the official plan has been reflected in both the first and the second drafts of the city's revised comprehensive zoning bylaw. And it's pretty hard to see on this map, but I know it has. And the problem is that this development proposal violates both of these very significant planning documents. Both the official plan, which I kind of see as our vision statement for how we want to see our city grow, and also the zoning bylaw, which to me is kind of like the roadmap of how we're going to get there. So if we allow this to proceed just as it's presented, at the very least, I feel we're wasting hours and hours, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of staff, councillors, and residents' time. I mean, just the public information sessions that Joel held over last summer be like a month of staff time. And if we aren't going to abide by these plans that we've set up, that we paid our professional planners to come up with, then why do we bother having them? And why are we spending taxpayers' money on this? Because this project will establish a precedent. There's no doubt about it in my mind, because the developers themselves hint at this when they note in their planning justification report that their project, with its requests for exemptions, is simply picking up on the higher density permitted in other recent approvals. It generally compares, they say. Now, it's true, and this has been alluded to several times, the official plan does state that for properties within the King Street height limit, minor increases in height beyond 16 meters may be considered. But I can't imagine anyone that would think that tripling the height of the King Street building, tripling it is a minor increase. And tonight people are talking about the podium as fitting the 16 meters, and we're just kind of imagining that the rest of the building disappears. That's not my reading of the bylaw, but I guess we could ask for that. But I'm not raising these concerns just because I think if we made a rule, we should follow it regardless of whether the proposal is really cool or not. I'm doing it because I think there's some other things that we have tried to work on in the past years that risk being broken if we don't follow them. And one of them is the heritage streetscape. I was really encouraged to hear how much Scott values the heritage buildings, because as you know, I do too. And if you've ever taken the Architectural Conservancy's walking tour of Uptown Waterloo, you will know what a rich assortment of heritage buildings we have in the Uptown, and how effectively they tell our story and how much they enrich us. And by the way, the post office, I know people called it a very plain building, but it is, in my opinion, a heritage building because it's our only mid-century modern building in Uptown Waterloo. And the point about mid-century modern buildings was that they were very efficient and sleek. It's a whole reflection of the era when they're built. But leaving that aside. But I really feel that the existing heritage, when you look at this rendering here, which is of the earlier version, that the rest of King Street is going to feel and look really out of place. And I don't think it will be long before we will be getting requests to demolish these or build them higher to kind of keep up with this cornerstone landmark building that we built here, keeping up with our new uptown look. And I think that's great if we want to scrap the vision we've had and decide, oh, we really want to look like Mississauga. But we're not. We're Waterloo. And the official plan had a vision for celebrating that. And also, I'd like to remind you that Jane Jacobs said that new ideas need old buildings. So I think that's an important thing, too, when we're talking about the innovation here. I don't know if anyone from Active Transportation Committee's here tonight, but I do think, and Councillor Freeman's alluded to this a little bit too, that Regina Street is currently considered an active transportation route for cyclists. It's already pretty narrow for cyclists, and this project, with its estimated 200 to 300 more cars turning out of the parking lot per day, according to the traffic study, and also built right to the street with zero setback, without any provision for street widening to better accommodate bicycles, will not help active transportation in the uptown. The other thing that concerns me about it is the streetscape improvements that we've just spent thousands of dollars on, not to mention thousands of hours of detours and frustration, for the sake of uptown streetscape improvements, which is wider streets with big patios so we can sit out in cafes. And this project shows barely any space for patios, even in the renderings, with so little sit back and no landscaping, although maybe that will come in the future. But more threatening the streetscape, in my opinion, is the height of this building. And I've tried really hard to understand wind studies. I read through the report, then I asked my son, who's an architect, asked the planner if they could explain it to me, but both of them told me they weren't experts in wind studies. So I'm left with my own best guess as to what these four wind comfort conditions that the study talks about really mean. They talk about a sitting, a standing, a leisurely walking, and a fast walking zone. So on the map there, we can see at the corner, so there's nowhere is there a sitting zone around this building, according to the wind study, except up on the inner areas of the 7th floor amenity, rooftop amenity area. But on this street level one, it's standing on the blue areas, and then the yellow are leisurely walking. So I'm guessing that means that you want to keep walking when you're there. You wouldn't want to sit out on the terrace and cafe. And wind tunnels is kind of an aside, but I've become quite concerned about them as we build more and more tall buildings, because every Saturday I walk from Waterloo down to the Kitchener Market. Right now, there's 2 high-rises that give me a wind tunnel effect, the Marsland Centre and one Victoria. And one Victoria does have a podium, too. And both of those, you really notice them. So I keep wondering about what we will feel as we go more in that. Now, I'm walking for the exercise, but people who aren't out there to get exercise may not feel so interested in doing that. And I think we wanted to have a walkable city, so I think this is something to think about with this development, because it's a matter of concern to me, and I'd like us to understand wind studies better and to think more about them. So in sum, if we could either stop the building at the podium level, then it would meet the 4 meters. That's one thing. Or, yeah, is that the right term? Not leave off the podium. Anyway, just at the short part of it. Or find a better site for it or something. I'm not sure. So there's a great project, but I'm really concerned that it's not the right building for this particular part of the city.
Thank you, Kay. Do we have any questions for the delegation? Okay. Thank you, Kay, very much. Okay. We do have some questions for staff. Councillor Freeman.
Through Chair Burke, one of the questions I forgot to ask and was reminded by the delegate is with regard to the integration of the original building. Is it just entirely going to be demolished? Is that the proposal, or is there any proposed reuse of the structure?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman, at this point the entire structure is to be demolished.
No further questions. We'll call our next delegation, Stephen Herzog. Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Herzog from Elgin Street in Waterloo. Unlike Mr. Hawkins, I actually do value the mid-century modern facade along King Street of the post office building and the green space in front of it. I think it is a valuable building and it would be nice to reuse it. I do, living in the area, in the immediate vicinity, I do walk along Regina, Bridgeport, King Street quite frequently, and in the winter, going up Bridgeport can be a bit icy, and if it's completely in shadow, it's going to be icier on both sides of the street and the street itself. As for the two towers, I've lived in a high-rise condominium in Halifax and had a beautiful view of the public gardens and Citadel. In a high-rise, it's all about the views. If there's another tower 15 meters away, I'm going to keep my blinds closed most of the time. And why would I want to buy something if I don't have a view? I really suggest the developer might consider just having a single tower so that all units will have views in all directions, or potentially. I think having another building 15 meters away is just too close. And from a wind studies point of view, I have read a number of wind studies, and one thing I have taken away is when you have an aperture between two buildings, a space between them, you're asking for trouble with wind effects. And so that would be another reason to have a single tower rather than two towers. I generally concur with most of KLG's points on the lack of setbacks and the whole process that we've gone through as far as heights in the uptown area go. I think we've had a lot of public input on that, and the official plan was given a lot of thought, and I think we should be very careful before we make any modifications to the heights and setbacks along King Street. I would really like to see some green space at ground level, green space that's up on top of a podium, or won't be green, but hardscaping on top of a podium isn't really a public amenity, and it would be nice to have some green space at ground level. The condominium on the east side of Regina Street does have a small area in front, and I think that adds to the community, and it would be nice to have something similar with this building. And as far as the need for biking accommodation, I think there is a need to widen Regina Street and Bridgeport Road to accommodate bike lanes, and I would like to see the developer dedicate 2 to 3 meters on Bridgeport Road and on Regina Street to enable that possibility in the future. Those are my comments. If there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Herzog. Appreciate your input. Do we have any questions for the delegation? I see none. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
We have questions for staff. Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, a couple of folks have mentioned accommodation for a road widening. Do we have any? I don't think we have any tools for that, right? Because a road widening is not in any plans for Bridgeport or Regina Street, is it?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman, there are in fact road widenings that are required both along King Street and Bridgeport Road, both of which are regional roads. I think there's a 2.4 meter road widening along Bridgeport and about 1.5 along King Street.
And so there's nothing in our transportation master plan for Regina?
The Regina Street portion does require, our official plan does recognize that Regina Street is to be a wider right-of-way eventually, but all of the road widenings are to be taken specifically on the east side.
No further questions? Is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Anyone? All right, if there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. And a reminder, if you are interested in that, make sure you sign the proper register at the back. We will now move on to item 7B, informal public meeting. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 7B, zoning bylaw amendment, application Z1801 with 1248058 Ontario Incorporated for 37, 39, and 41 King Street North. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public seeing this application for the first time. Council looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and the staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wishes further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. Again, if there's more than one registry, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application.
Good evening, Chair Burke, Mayor Jaworski, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public. As noted, this is an informal public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment Z1801. The address is 37, 39, and 41 King Street North, and it's owned by a numbered company. The site, as indicated in the center of the screen, is located on the west side of King Street North. It is located between Princess Street West and DuPont Street East, and is located just north of what I refer to, not to get confused with the previous application, as the old post office rather than the old post office. The old post office is located at 35 King Street North, and it is a designated building under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. The property in behind, so this is the site here, this is the old post office, and then this here is 12 DuPont Street, which is actually the old Market Hotel. It is also a designated heritage building under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Just to orient you as well, there's an additional listed heritage property right here, which is that Futon store as well as the Starlight Lounge. The property itself is 0.13 hectares in size. The property is it had an existing building on the property which was destroyed by fire back in 2013. The property is currently designated under the official plan and zoning bylaw, under the official plan rather, as Uptown Commercial Core. It is identified within the Uptown Growth Center and is identified as a primary node. It is within a Main Street designation which contemplates heights of up to 16 meters. It is owned within our zoning bylaws Commercial 8, so C825, and has site bylaws 05066 and two other site bylaws that were brought in 2017, which provided additional commercial uses. The applicants are requesting zoning bylaw amendment Z1801 to include a site-specific provision to the existing C8 zone to reduce the required parking from 29 spaces to 5 spaces, and to reduce the rear yard setback. Currently, it's required at 4.5 meters, and the applicant is requesting 0.91 meters. The reason for the site-specific amendments that they're seeking is to construct a 3-story building in what is currently now a vacant site. It will have 2 units of ground floor retail. The second floor is proposed for office use, and the third floor is also proposed for office use. You can see here, this is DuPont Street and this is King Street. This is the proposed new building that is the reason for the zoning amendments. Access would be provided to that property
through a lane that currently exists behind the old post office into this property, and parking would be provided at ground. They're proposing, as I said, 5 spaces. Parking would be provided at grade with access in the rear, and the second and third floor would actually cantilever over top of that parking. You would not see the parking from King Street. At King Street, it would appear as a 3-story facade. I've included some perspective renderings that were submitted by the applicant to give you an idea of what this would look like. The proposal is actually intended to connect to the post office building on its south facade. So as you can see here in this rendering, this is proposed as retail, 2 units of retail, office on the 2nd floor, and office on the 3rd floor. And there's different views from the corner of King and DuPont, as well as here, this is showing DuPont Street and access into the parking at grade, which would be cantilevered over, the 2nd floor and 3rd floor would cantilever over top. And this is a bird's eye view looking southwest from King Street. Various reports, plans, and studies were submitted by the applicant in support of this application, including a planning justification report, heritage impact assessment, concept site plan, elevations, a letter from the architect, survey, and servicing information. So going forward, staff will be reviewing all the information and studies submitted by the applicant. We will be reviewing the requested parking reduction, review of the requested rear yard setback that they're seeking, and the heritage implications that this may have, as well as looking at the context of the proposed development in Uptown and the overall request that they're seeking. We will also be looking at any comments received from the public and any agencies, as well as any other items that might come forward. What will happen next is, of course, staff will take all this information into consideration, prepare a staff report with recommendations to council, and we'll come back to council for a formal public meeting. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. We do have a few. Once again, please remember, informal public meeting. Only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. We'll begin with Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. On the parking reduction, what city policies and that will we use as a lens to assess that? Will we use the CIP, the Community Improvement Plan, or what types of things will we be using? It's obviously a major change.
There are a number of tools outlined in the official plan that staff may use in their evaluation. The CIP is one tool in which the applicant could obtain a reduction in parking. Also, the official plan has policies that talk to cash in lieu of parking. That is another tool that the city has in their toolbox that we could apply to this property for the reduction in parking. So these are, of course, tools that city staff will be looking at in reviewing this application.
And my second and final question is on setbacks. In the previous application, we heard that there's essentially no setbacks or 0 lot line, something like that. Yet this one seems to have a substantial rear yard setback requirement. What's the difference between the two properties, or maybe you can help compare?
Absolutely. Through you, Chair Burke, to Mayor Jaworski, the setback requirements for the side yards and front yard for this particular property is 0 meters. So there are no setback requirements for front and side yards. It's the rear yard where there is a requirement for 4.5 meters. I can't speak in exact detail for the last application, but I suspect because there are many flankage lot lines in that instance, perhaps the rear yard does not apply. But in this case, what they're seeking is an exemption from the rear yard.
Councilor Leith.
Through you, Chair Burke. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. I'm just wondering how this is going to be attached to that beautiful heritage building. How are you going to get from one to the other? They're not blowing out the wall or anything.
Through you, Chair Burke, I will let the applicant speak to that. However, what I can say is what is proposed is a glass building. So the concept, from what I understand by the applicant, is that you will be able to see the north facade of the post office through the glass facade of the new building. I also understand that there will be one doorway that you could walk from the post office building into the new building. Again, I'll let them answer in more detail, but from what I understand, the majority of that facade is to be maintained as is.
Councillor Whaley.
On that theme, the renderings show a very interesting clash of architectural styles, and it's interesting to contemplate. My concern, as Councillor Beese has mentioned, is that we have this historic building, one of the most historic buildings in our community, being changed on the north facade, and I just wonder what kind of protection that north facade has through its designation, so that that would limit the changes to how it looks. I guess what you're saying is we're going to get more information from the applicant, right?
Through you, Chair Burke, yes. And in addition, I'd like to add that our heritage planner is closely viewing this application, as well as the Heritage Committee will be or has already seen this application, and we will be strongly considering a lot of their comments or recommendations that they put forward from a heritage perspective.
With respect to the rear yard setback, essentially the applicant is pushing the building right into within a meter of the lot line, and it seemed to me that the picture that you showed was that the former hotel on DuPont Street was also pressed right up against the lot line. So is there some kind of understanding or agreement between neighbors that that is going to be okay to be so close together, or does the neighbor have because it's an established building at zero setback, have any rights or responsibilities with respect to reviewing this application?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, just to clarify, you're referring to the Market Hotel to the east or to the west? Correct. So, as any neighbor for any application, they absolutely have an opportunity to review the application, review the submission materials, and comment, whether written or verbal, and to provide any information or comments or questions that they have on this application. And we would consider those in our staff review.
So council and community are hearing this for the first time. Is it possible that that neighbor is hearing it for the first time tonight as well?
Through you, Chair Burke, it is possible.
I think, Joel, do you have something here?
Through you, Councillor Burke to Councillor Whaley, the adjacent property we're speaking of is also owned by the applicant. So the applicant is fully aware of the proposed development and the impact of their adjacent property.
Any further questions? Councillor Drill.
I'm actually really curious to how close this is to the former building that was there that burned down. Is it pretty much the same footprint that was there before the fire?
Through you, Chair Burke, it's been hard to find aerial photos showing the exact location of the building, but I do believe that the front facade is in a fairly similar location. As far as the rear yard setback, that's something that staff will have to take a further review of.
Mm-hmm.
If there are no further questions, thank you. And we have a delegation here. Carol.
Good evening, Chair Burke, Mayor Jaworski, and members of committee. I am here this evening on behalf of the applicant for the proposed zoning amendment for 37 to 41 King Street. With me this evening are representatives of the owner, Mr. Georgiadis, And I also have Jason Martin from Martin Simmons Architects. So I'll do my best after my presentation to answer as many questions as possible, but I'll also defer to the other two individuals if there's some questions that I'm not able to answer. As Natalie pointed out, the property is fronting directly onto King Street, just north of DuPont. But what I really wanted to point out on this image is that you can see that the development parcels are really small in size. There's quite a number of individual, very narrow and long parcels that run up I'll say the west side of King Street. And you can see that most of these parcels, the buildings are generally built to the lot line. Certainly they're built right up to King Street. And in many cases, the buildings are also built right to the side lot lines. So there's a really compact form of development in this part of the uptown. And if you look at on the screen this part right here, you can see that all of the buildings actually extend right to what is that rear lot line. There is a public lane that runs south of DuPont. That public lane does not extend north of DuPont, but in each of those cases on the block to the south, those buildings actually extend right from the front of King right through to the rear of the property. So there is a bit of a pattern of development in the uptown, so that the buildings, because of the small parcel sizes, really try to make the most efficient use of these parcels. And you'll also see that with a few exceptions, there's not a lot of surface parking. There is some parking. You can see a few examples here, and then there's another surface parking lot there. And then there is also a limited amount of on-street parking here. But generally, the form of development, generally the buildings occupy the majority of the site. Just as Natalie said, and this gives you a good image of what the building used to look like. And so it was built right up to the front of the street. And as noted, that building was demolished to fire. It's actually just prior to 2013. And the current owner acquired the site after the fire took place. And since then, once the building was demolished, it's been a vacant parking lot. So you can see from the two images that really the property has remained vacant. And so it creates this hole in the urban fabric and the streetscape along King Street, and it's certainly desirable to replace that empty parking lot with a building. As was also noted, the site is very small. It's 1/3 of an acre, and it's positioned immediately adjacent to 35 King Street North, which is the historic post office, and it's designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And there is a conservation easement that's in place for the post office. And what's also not noted on this slide is that the building behind, which staff mentioned on DuPont, that was also referred to as the Market Hotel. And that is the building that actually fronts directly onto DuPont. There have been subsequent additions that have been added to that market building. And so those additions that are adjacent to this subject property are not part of that designation. So the Market Hotel, it was then subsequently purchased by John Forsyth, and when the John Forsyth Company operated that, there were additional buildings used, and then the apartment building that's there right now, which is the building immediately to the rear of this site, that is not part of the designation for 12 DuPont. So I just wanted to clarify that the proposed building is not abutting right up to a designated building. And just in terms of the context of the official plan, I wanted to just touch on this one policy that speaks about creating a vibrant and human-scaled environment. Certainly along King Street, that's well enshrined in the official plan. Also to provide uses that would support public transit and other transportation alternatives to the automobile, architectural integrity and heritage conservation, and building on those opportunities. So this is something that I think is particularly relevant for this application. Again, it's a 3-story building. The previous building was 2 stories in height, so there is one additional building floor added to this. And as I said, it's situated between 35 King North and 43 King North. And the ground floor is proposed to be used for retail, and then office on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And again, as noted, the parking will be accessed by the rear, and it's also important to note that the applicant also owns the historic post office site. So the access across the back of the historic post office site to get to the parking it's all owned by the applicant, various different numbered companies, and ultimately the properties will be merged within the same ownership for construction. And the main access to this building will come directly off of King Street in order to maintain that street presence along King and maintain the pedestrian access in its historical situation. I won't actually go through this because I think Natalie did, but as noted, this is the old post office, and the access for the parking that would be under here is proposed to come off this back private lane, and then the parking will be totally enclosed in the building. And the front of the building is also representative of the historical street edge along King Street, so try to maintain that street presence along King. And you can see that there's a separation here. And that separation has been historically maintained, and there are some windows along this building immediately to the north. So we wanted to make sure that there was sufficient separation between the facade of the new building and the windows along here. And just to touch on that here, this building is proposed to be 0.9 meters. The existing building also is approximately about 0.9 meters as well. There's a retaining wall, and then the building is stepped back. There are no windows proposed along the back of this building. The glazing is concentrated on the side here and certainly the front of the building, and I'll get into that in a little bit in some subsequent slides. So there's 2 amendments being requested. The first one is dealing with the rear yard, which requests a 4.5 meters and asking for 0.91 meters. And the other one is asking for a reduction from the 29 spaces that if we were to apply the parking rate of 2.15 to the proposed building would require 29, and the applicant is proposing 5. And in order to address certainly the parking reduction, I think there's a number of factors that we need to take into account. And what this slide illustrates is that there's a lot of support for alternative modes of transport. There are certainly a number of parking lots, both public and private parking lots within close proximity of the site, and you can see those marked with the P. There's certainly bike lanes, and we heard about that on the previous application, so there's certainly well-used cycling routes throughout the uptown, not on King, but on the boundary streets that would facilitate transport by bicycle. We also have the I-Express bus that runs right by the site, and of course LRT, which is only a short stroll away. So there's lots of alternative modes of transport to support people that would be either coming here to shop or people that would be working in the building. And I think the other thing that we want to recognize is that the uptown Waterloo is very compact, it's small, and it's surrounded by these neighborhoods. So it's a very walkable uptown. There's a lot of low-density residential. So people that are choosing to come here, it is a very friendly, and it's in proximity to the neighborhoods. And as we know, there's a lot of new residents that are coming and living in the uptown through some of the intensification. So this actually helps to support this walkable, complete community by creating places of employment. And I can say from the experience that the applicant has had, because they're, as you are aware, they've in the process of restoring 19 Regina, which is the old Legion building. And so they've had a lot of interaction with businesses that are looking to locate in the uptown. And they're looking to locate in the uptown not because there's lots of parking, because they want to be there. They want to be there because it's a walkable uptown. They know that there's other modes of transport. They know that there's going to be rapid transit. They know that it's well served by buses. It's got biking, it's got walking, pedestrian, and with the streetscapes along King Street, it's really going to try and create that and build upon that pedestrian focus in the uptown. So businesses that are looking to rent space in this building are going to be fully aware of the parking reduction. So they're not coming here expecting that they're going to get a lot of parking. They're coming here because, one, they want to be here, and two, a lot of their employees probably want to live in the uptown, so they're going to be walking. So people that would be renting this space are going to be fully aware of that parking, and the owner of the building, and then this proposal is fully confident based on their experience already in the core, because they have a number of commercial properties, that is not going to be an issue. And really, historically, the most parking that this site has ever been able to provide is no more than 5 spaces. And we went back and looked at the historical buildings just to touch on that rear setback. There were buildings over time that went right to the rear of the property. So at one point, this entire site was occupied with different buildings, and there was no parking. And even more recently, before the building burnt down, there were no more than 5 parking stalls, and so there was residential above and retail on the ground floor. But as I said, people and businesses come to the uptown not expecting that they're going to have a lot of parking. So I think there's certainly justification, and I think there's certainly experienced developers and local businesses. And again, the overall size of this building is quite compact. It's under 15,000. So you're not going to be attracting the large employers that are going to have maybe a higher parking demand. You're looking for small startups, small businesses that are purposely choosing to locate in the uptown. So again, as I said, part of the problem with these small parcels is that it's not physically possible to fit 29 parking stalls on this property, even if the developer wanted to. They're too small. And so there's a provision in the existing zoning bylaw that says that the parking that existed in place prior to this bylaw being passed are deemed to be grandfathered. And so there was a grandfathering in place for this property prior to the building burning down. And there's a 2-year time frame from demolition that you get grandfathered. Now, because this wasn't a planned demolition, it was accidental because of the fire.
Carol, if I can just jump in for a second, you are a minute over time.
Okay.
So if we can move forward on that.
I'll go for the reduced setback then. So as I said, historical records have demonstrated that that there were buildings that occupied this property right up to the back. And then what we looked is that 4.5 meter setback has only ever been used for parking since those other buildings were used. So in the up-down core, those rear yards aren't used for amenity space. They're usually used as lanes, service areas, and parking. So that function, that usability of that rear space is still going to be used for parking as it always has. So I want to just touch on briefly on the heritage. There's going to be 2 heritage impact assessments undertaken. The first one that was done for this rezoning is simply to assess the impact of the amendments that are being requested. So the HIA looked at what is the impact of the request for reduction in parking, and what is the impact of the request for the reduction in the setback. And the conclusion that the heritage assessment concluded was that it's a neutral. It doesn't benefit, it doesn't detract. So the reduction in parking, in fact, is actually a net benefit, because you don't want a lot of parking on that site. You don't want to have 29 parking stalls, because it will detract from the heritage building, the old post office. So I'll close with a few renderings. So you've seen these before, and just to build on what Councillor Whaley said, it's a very contemporary building, but that's intentional. It's intentional because it's going to be very clean and very simple, and it's not going to detract or compete with the historic post office. And that's really a well accepted and supported approach when you have designated buildings. You don't want to try and replicate. You don't want to try and create a poor image of the building. So it's intended to really step back, and you can see here that this glazing at night, this will be lit up. You can actually see the whole wall of the heritage building. So it's intended to really showcase, because the previous building was solid. You never actually really got to see this facade of the building. So that will actually open that up. And then here's a few color renderings. And again, they're taken from the perspective of the corner, so you can see that the intent is that this building is really intended to sort of almost fade into the background. It will reflect the sky. It will not repeat or imitate the heritage building, but really be a very simple, clean architectural design. And then the last slide, this is coming off of the view from DuPont. So you can see this is the side of the building and the access off of DuPont. So you can see that, again, it's not intended to replicate or duplicate the architectural attributes of the post office, but really just to work in a complementary manner. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll do my best to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carol. Do we have any questions? Mayor Jaworski.
Through the chair, thank you, Carol. On the access laneway that will go to the new building behind the historic post office, is that currently parking for the post office, or is there any impact there to be considered, or is that just empty space now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is strictly functions as a lane. There is no parking for the post office. And in fact, as I said, the post office did not have any parking, and it's grandfathered, and it doesn't have to provide any. So it's simply an access.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke, I guess a couple of questions to staff. So in this rendering, I see that there's a glass terrace on top of the former heritage building, and I just didn't know if that's part of this application, and knew it doesn't exist right now. And the second question is with regard to our heritage planner and whether or not they're providing or planning to provide comment on the HIA that was done for this application, and whether we have a sign-off process for that, because I don't know if we do. Kitchener does. I don't know if we do.
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman, our heritage planner has been circulated the full submission package and is reviewing the HIA. My understanding is she did provide the applicants the terms of reference in which to prepare the HIA, and is my understanding of how the HIA was prepared. She's currently reviewing this document and will be providing comments. In addition, if it has not already gone to the Heritage Committee, it will be going to the Heritage Committee for review. And those will be pieces of information that staff will be reviewing in their final report back to Council. And to answer your previous question, the Heritage Post Office, the 35 King Street, is not part of the application. So if they are intending to modify the internal components of the building or external components of the building, that would be subject to the current zoning regulations that are in place today. If they were looking to modify those, they would need to come through Council for a zoning bylaw amendment.
And just for clarification, this proposal has come in front of the Heritage Committee, and they had a full discussion of it, and is moving on, as you've mentioned, to the next phase. Councillor Whaley.
Well, Carol, as I'm not allowed to comment on how captivated I am by the design of this building, I'll go on to talk about trying to understand the intention of the upper commercial floors. Is it to be a part of or an extension of the old post office uses, so that the two buildings, in fact, work as one on the commercial floors?
Through you, Chair Bork. Generally, the answer is yes. So the second and third floor are intended to be used for office space, and there will be connecting links from the historic post office into the new space. There will also be access through an elevator that will be in the historic post office as well, so that you enter the existing lobby in the historic post office, you go up the elevator, and then you get onto the second floor of the historic post office, and then there will be connections at the back into the new space. So it's also important, as I mentioned, that this heritage impact assessment is only intended to assess the amendment that's in front of council, which is the reduction in the setback and the reduction in the parking. The next stage of development for site plan, another heritage impact assessment will be required to assess how that new building is to be connected, how those heritage attributes are to be preserved and enhanced, and so that those details will be assessed once again through the site plan process.
Councillor Durrell.
Well, all my questions have been asked.
Okay, Councillor Freeman.
Sorry to be thick. I'm just trying to understand. I'm looking at the actual heritage post office from Google Image on DuPont Street, and there looks like there's pieces of the building that have been removed in this plan. And so I guess I just need to better understand how that works and whether they're protected, or if they're not protected, why aren't they protected? So there's an overhang on that rear building, for example, that's not shown in this image. And I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to understand it. There is a detailed report done on the fire separation on the north side. This appears as though it's wrapping somewhat around on this side. I don't know whether the fire separation report relates to this side as well, but it appears as though that overhang is no longer there. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I'd like to know.
As I said, this through Chair Burke. So any alterations to the historic post office are not part of the application that's before council this evening. And it may be that the image may indicate that there are some parts removed, but there is no intention to remove any components of the historic post office building.
Do we have any further questions? Seeing we do not, thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? If there are no more delegations, then this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you. And we will move on to our first non-post office informal public meeting. Item 7C. This is an informal public meeting to consider item 7C, official plan amendment number 19 and zoning bylaw amendment Z1803, Northbridge Holdings Incorporated at 255 Northfield Drive East. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and the staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on a desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is, of course, more than one registry, please ensure you are signing the appropriate one. And the planner will now provide a brief overview.
Good evening again. Informal public meeting for zoning bylaw amendment Z-18-03, and it's also an official plan amendment number 19. The property in question is 255 Northfield Drive. It's owned by Urban Legend Developments Limited. The site in question is located at Northfield Drive and Bridge Street, so the south-southwest corner. It is located between Frobisher Drive and Deer Run Drive is located to the south, and it's approximately 2.9 hectares in size. Surrounding land uses include industrial to the northwest, commercial land uses to the northeast, and residential to the southeast. There's also Deer Run Park located south of the property. A 43-meter wide hydro transmission corridor runs along the south of the property. So here, it's hard to tell, but this is actually a tower here. You can see the shadow. The official plan designates the property as a mixed-use neighborhood commercial designation. It's identified also as a minor node and as specific provision area 46, which establishes some policies for the area, for the specific site rather. It is contemplated for medium density development up to a maximum height of 20 meters. The zoning bylaw zones the property mixed use commercial and their MXC, and there is a site bylaw 2012-044 which provides some site specific provisions for the property. The applicant is seeking an official plan amendment to change the designation in the city's official plan from mixed-use neighborhood commercial and minor node to mixed-use medium-density residential and convenience commercial, and instead of a minor node to establish the property as a minor corridor with site-specific provisions. The applicant is also requesting a zoning bylaw amendment to change the zone of the property from mixed-use commercial to mixed-use residential and convenience commercial with site-specific provisions. The applicant has submitted a conceptual master site plan of the property. I'll walk you through it. It is hard to see, I apologize. The hydro transmission corridor is located along the southern portion of the property. The applicant is proposing to develop it in phases. The first phase includes this building here, as well as the majority of the parking located here, and this access onto Bridge Street, and an access here up to Northfield Drive. The first building, so the first phase, is a 6-story mixed-use building, residential units and retail on the ground floor. So residential units rather from the 2nd to 6th floor. The second phase of the development is this building here. They've identified it as Building B, strictly for residential purposes. So the plan here identifies 92 units. I've since been advised that some of these numbers have changed. They've modified slightly to a higher number. For example, this building, I understand, is 102. We have yet to receive the updated site plan, but just to advise council that some of these numbers have changed slightly. The third phase of the development would consist of this portion here, so a number of parking as well as 3 commercial pads intended for single-story commercial use that would front Bridge Street located here, and the final phase of the development being a mirrored image of this building, so a 6-story residential building and the associated parking. The majority of the parking will be provided at grade, but there is access to an underground parking structure for this area here, and just to confirm to members of the committee that this building and this building will actually be connected after the construction of this second building here. Total commercial proposed is just under, or just over, I guess, 1,800 square meters. And the number of units is approximately 280 residential units. So by way of background, this site, there was an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment that was approved for this site back in 2012. Prior to that application, the property was designated medium density residential and minor corridor and was zoned as multiple residential. The approved application in 2012 changed the designation of the property to mixed-use neighborhood commercial and changed the property from a minor corridor to a minor node in the official plan. Also, for the zoning bylaw, it changed the zoning of the property from multiple residence, so MR6, to mixed-use commercial, MXC, which is the current zoning on the property. So the policies and regulations established for the property through SPA 46 and bylaw 2012-044 were established to permit residential and commercial uses that were proposed at that time, which was a 6-story mixed-use building with a number of single-story commercial uses, including a food store that was proposed along Bridge Street. So the applicant in the current application has identified that although there is demand for commercial uses on this property at this time, there's no longer market interest for a food store or the extent of commercial uses contemplated at that time through that application in 2012. So the proposal before staff now is for a mix of residential and commercial, but a degree lesser than what was proposed back in 2012. So the application is to come forward with modifications to those very specific development policies through the specific provision area in the official plan, as well as modifications to the specific bylaw that was implemented in 2012 for that application at that time. So just to provide a bit of background. The reports and plans submitted with the application include a planning justification report, the master site plan, which I showed to you previously, urban design brief, building elevations, shadow study, transportation impact study, road and stationary noise study, and some servicing information as well. So of course these will all be reviewed in staff's evaluation of the proposal. Through staff reviews, we will be taking a look at these reports and plans, as well as the requested official plan amendment and the requested zoning amendment, specifically how it will apply to the conceptual master site plan that they're putting forward at this time. And we will be taking into consideration, of course, as always, public input and agency comments and anything else that comes up through the evaluation of this application. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Natalie. We have a couple of questions. By the way, I will caution you, only questions of clarification. Councillor Whaley.
I do remember this coming forward as a supermarket at one time, and there was lots of resistance in the neighborhood at that time. This is an interesting and detailed, lots of changes. You talked about it being staged, so building 1 is first off and parking for that. But is the staging, do you have any sense of whether this is a 10-year plan or whether the buildings will come off one after the other and keep it under construction for a really long time? Or is there a building and then a delay and then another building over an extended period?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, the applicant will likely be able to speak to the length of time that they're intending the full build-out to take. However, I can indicate that building A, so this building here is the only mixed-use building on the property, has already received recommended site plan approval. The applicants have designed this building to actually adhere to current zoning regulations and current official plan policies, with the exception of height, that they went through the Committee of Adjustment and received approval by the Committee of Adjustment to ensure that the height was permitted. So this first building, as I understand, is well underway from an approvals perspective. As to the rest of the phases, I cannot speak to timing, but I'm sure the applicant can provide you an idea of the timeline.
Councillor Reid. We're looking at each other. I wasn't sure whether you wanted to.
Through you, Chair Burke. Just a couple questions. One is, could there be contemplated a drive-through on this property in the future?
Through you, Chair Burke, my apologies, I should have mentioned that. This here is a drive-through. that's shown on the site plan that would service this second commercial pad. So it is something that the applicant has put forward in the zoning amendment request, is to permit a drive-through for this building. And absolutely, that's something that staff is going to take a look at.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I asked. And my other question, have there been any public meetings about this so far?
Through you, Chair Burke, there have not been any scheduled public meetings other than this evening. However, my understanding is from the applicant, their consulting team have gone out door to door to the residents of Deer Run Park, specifically those that abut the property, and have presented the application to them. Also, within the planning justification report, they submitted a handout that they provided these residents if they weren't at home when they went door to door to present the proposal. From what I understand, a lot of the feedback has been positive, but that's what I've understood from the applicant.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke. So when the other application had come through, there was a tremendous amount of citizen involvement in modifying the site plan to address specific concerns that people had, notwithstanding the fact that I read in the executive summary and the justification report, which I haven't finished reading, that Mr. Levac and his team have gone and knocked on all the doors, and I can imagine that people did provide feedback that they were happy that the 24-hour grocery store wasn't there, because that was a huge concern. But they had other concerns, and they were all incredibly valid, and I would really like a summary somewhere of the changes that were made to the site plan to address the issues that were raised by the community. So we should have that. We'll have the original site plan that was there before, because some of the elements that I don't see on here relate to berming. So they've maintained the pedestrian walkway through the site to the backs of the homes, but there was a significant amount of landscaping that was a part of that project, because the homeowners, they were concerned about people potentially climbing the fence, entering their backyard, safety concerns in that respect. And this is just what I remember. I'm sure there was a lot more. I know that there was some traffic control on this in and out at Bridge Street, so that there wouldn't be a left turn exit, I think. Anyways, there was a whole bunch of things that folks had raised, and I just would like to understand how this site plan aligns with those changes that had been made between the two plans.
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman. Very good questions. I'm going to try my best to answer all three of those separately. The first that you mentioned was the walkway and the berming. Both of those site plan features were established or implemented through the site-specific official plan policies for the property and the zoning to ensure that they were set in stone for that previous proposal, so that when it was developed, they had to provide the 2-meter walkway, they had to provide a berm that was X number of meters in height and X number of meters wide in certain locations. That is, the applicant is proposing to maintain that as is with no changes. Even though the food store is no longer proposed, they are not suggesting any modifications at all to the walkway, the berm, the way that it's currently worded in both the official plan policies and the zoning bylaw. As your question about the access onto Bridge Street, you're correct. It originally in the previous proposal was limited to right-in, right-out turning movements only. And my understanding in reviewing the staff reports was that it was, the concern was for truck traffic, because that was where the loading zone was proposed for the food store. In discussions with the region, based on the proposal as it currently is shown, a limited right-in, right-out movement is no longer required, and the region is comfortable, through discussions we've had with regional staff, for a full turning movement onto Bridge Street.
I have a follow-up to that then, because I think one could reasonably assume that pads 1, 2, and 3 may have receiving vehicles that will be large body trucks. And I don't know what pad 2 is, but if it's a Tim Hortons, McDonald's, anything like that, they all have 18-wheelers. And I think that that concern around truck movement is still valid, and I'd like it looked at again, please. There was also some commitments with regard to pedestrian connections onto Deer Run. And I don't know where that stands. Is that in the site specific as well?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Freeman, yes, the connections to the park were also something that were established through the current policies and zoning. And again, my understanding is that it's not something intended to be modified in the current application.
And if I might be able to clarify, the truck turning movements, that was also related to 18-wheelers using Bridge Street as the primary access. So if this entry point to this property is conducive to that truck turning movement, the noise of those trucks traveling on Bridge Street was a concern to the residents. And so they wanted to ensure that there was some direction provided that transport trucks and delivery vehicles and all of that kind of thing, that their primary entrance to this property is off Northfield. And so that turning movement had been modified to address that concern.
And so through you, Chair Burke, staff will be reviewing in staff review, we will be understanding the commercial uses that they intend to put forward and understanding the truck traffic movements or needs for those commercial uses to better understand that from the noise perspective and traffic turning movements.
I guess I had another, I'm going to just signal my turns around the drive-throughs, that I think we really need to look at that very carefully. And I also wondered whether or not there'd be an opportunity to host a neighborhood information session related to this, because there may not be as much interest in this application with these changes, because I recognize that it's a less intense use. However, there was tremendous interest in this application in the past, and I would like to give residents that opportunity to participate in that. And I think that the intent of that meeting will be to help residents understand what was approved before, what's being proposed now, almost a checklist, and in conjunction with their concerns.
Are there any further questions from council? Seeing none, we'll move on to our delegation. Thank you. And that is Jennifer Voss.
Good evening, Councillor Burke, Mayor Jaworski, and members of council. My name is Jennifer Voss, and I'm a planning consultant for this project. I'm here tonight with Paul Levesque, the applicant and the developer of the subject lands. And Paul and I are here tonight to introduce the project and the vision for the subject lands. So I'll be doing the first half of the presentation, and Paul will be doing the latter half of the presentation. So as Natalie described in her presentation, the original proposal back in 2012 was for a food store, and the food store was basically the anchor for the development, for the proposed development. There was also a multi-tenant retail building, single story, and a 6-story residential apartment building with ground floor commercial use. So as you can see on this slide, it was a 70-30 commercial residential split, with the commercial as the visual anchor at Bridge and Northfield intersection. The residential part of the development was on the west end of the site. And as Natalie indicated, the food store never materialized. There was no market interest for a food store, and there was also little interest, obviously, for the amount of retail that was originally envisioned for the site. So hence, fast forward to 2018, we are proposing an amendment, an official plan amendment, to essentially designate it back to what it was originally designated, which was medium density residential, although we are providing a commercial component as part of our proposal because we feel that there is some demand for commercial uses at this site, and it's still going to be a mixed-use development, but in a different building form. So the current proposal, again, is 2 apartment buildings, 6-story apartment buildings, and a mixed-use building with ground floor retail and 3 standalone commercial pads. The official plan and the zoning amendment is required to facilitate the development of the 2 all-residential apartment buildings and the 3 commercial pads. The OPA ZBA is not required for the first building, the mixed-use building, which is the first phase. And as part of that, that building we have complied with all of the zoning regulations that were in the site-specific 2012 zoning amendment, which included the landscaped berm, the asphalt 2-meter trail to connect along the southern property line to connect to the park, the amount of mixed use within the first building, so it's about 10,000 square feet of multi-tenant commercial units within the building. And the only thing that we're proposing a change in terms of the site-specific regulations that were included in the 2012 proposal is the full turning movement access on Bridge Street. And as Natalie had said, there was an issue with the grocery store and the amount of large transport trucks coming into the site for a 24-hour large format grocery store. And that was the issue, was that the large transport trucks would be entering the site, and they didn't want them to make the left-hand turn. They wanted them to come in on a bridge and then go out onto Northfield, so there was no backward movement and that beep, beep, beep sound. Like, that was the concern that the residents had. We don't anticipate any large transport trucks accessing this site. The commercial uses are small in scale, and deliveries wouldn't be daily, and they would be like through a smaller size delivery truck. So that is why we're requesting the full access turning movement onto Bridge Street, and that's been considered in our traffic impact study. Oops. Excellent. So this is the proposed phasing, and as you can see, phase 1 includes the first building, the mixed-use building, and again, we have submitted a site plan application for that, and we've received conditional site plan approval. There's a number of conditions to fulfill, and part of that site plan application, we did have to meet all of the zoning regulations that are currently on site, and the 2012 zoning amendment was very site specific, and it included a lot of the design considerations that were crafted as part of that proposal to address the concerns of the neighbors. So again, we're proposing the berm, we're proposing the asphalt, the walkway connecting to the park. The building has set back as close to Northfield Drive as we can. There is a road widening that the region is taking. But again, we've pushed the massing of the building up, of all the buildings up to Northfield Drive and to Bridge Street to have that, it provides a natural separation between the residential uses to the south, but it also gives it a better streetscape in terms of the overall development. So I will now turn it over to Paul, who is going to present the last part. He's going to be discussing the design principles that went into the master site plan and the overall vision for the development.
Thank you, Jen. I'll keep this fairly short, and I'll try and answer some of the councillors' questions. So the proposed phasing, Jen covered off, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we came about this particular concept. It was largely driven, obviously, by the hydro corridor to the south boundary. That's approximately 40 meters in width, providing a natural boundary between the south residents, the single detached dwellings on Deer Run Drive, and the buildings that we're proposing to face onto Northfield Drive. As a result of that, we were allowed to, I guess, perhaps create a secondary purpose for our commercial on the east side of the property, which we broke up. If you recall, the proposed grocery store was a large format and was going to create a fairly large facade along Bridge Street. So we wanted to break that up, provide some sight lines into the site, as we do have some commercial at ground level under phase 1 or building A of the project. The tenants that we're particularly pursuing right now within this development, under building A, the strip retail is about 10,000 square feet there. We're proposing a mix of convenience grocery, so a much smaller format, but something that people, particularly local residents to the neighborhood, can walk and pick up convenience grocery. And then also a medical use facility. There's an interest in a dentist, alternative medicine, pharmacy, so there'll be that sort of particular use. For the commercial pads, we've got interest on corner pad. We envision a higher end restaurant. There's not a lot of food services in this particular area of the city, particularly the residents that live in the area, as well as the people that work to the north in the industrial park. There's not a lot, really the only area in this particular area of the city that they can go to is the Davenport Northfield area for quick convenience food. So we do recognize, we think that there's use, and we do have interest from a higher end restaurant, something along the lines of the Keg, or to compete with the Keg that's down the street. The drive-through or pad 2, we envision a higher end coffee shop of sorts, and then the third pad, the smaller of the three, we envision a financial institution. There's a number of the Skyday banks that are underrepresented in this quadrant of the city that have shown some interest in the site as well. In preparing the site plan and putting it together, we've tried to delineate the uses as best as possible between the residential and the commercial, so that we don't have the commingling and inconvenience between the people using the commercial and the residents of the site. So we've paid particular attention to trying to create some courtyards for the residents, that they'll have private access into their site and into their buildings without interfering with the activities of the commercial, and vice versa. We've also tried to create a sort of a nice primary drive aisle off of Northfield Drive that will create a promenade entrance between the two buildings. Just a little bit about traffic and site circulation, paying particular attention and sort of building off of that theme. We've provided a number of entrances. We spoke a little bit about the full turn access off-bridge that we're proposing. And as Jennifer alluded to, the region has, feels, along with our traffic consultant, that a full service interchange is appropriate now that the primary delivery vehicles for the commercial properties will likely be much smaller vehicles, single axle transport trucks. And we won't be seeing the large 53-footers coming through this site that I think you would have had with a 24-hour grocery store. We've also provided full change intersection access off Northfield Drive with a full left turn access off of Northfield into the site, so there'll be a left turn lane proposed as well, heading westbound on Northfield. I
just want to point out that we are over your time again, so please.
Yep. We've got dedicated accesses. Our parking for the residential is separate from the commercial. We've got our dedicated commercial parking, and then we have a shared mixed-use parking area. We also have, I should mention as well, an underground parking, so approximately 45% of the residential parking will be provided via an underground shared parking garage between buildings B and C. Our primary drive-through traffic would be following this particular pattern, so a lot of traffic coming inbound off Northfield directly into the drive-through access and then out through Bridge Street. There will likely be some secondary incidental uses coming through the promenade entrance off Northfield. Pedestrian use, as Jen mentioned, we paid particular attention to ensuring that we maintain that corridor of pedestrian use along the hydro corridor. And from there, access into the buildings directly was important. We recognize that a lot of people will be using the park and accessing the residential subdivision, so we provided that. Within the building structures, we provided a lobby mezzanine or lobby area that has access both from Northfield Drive and the courtyards for dual access, providing a nice facade from the Northfield. We've got pedestrian accesses in multiple points along Northfield, as well as multiple points along Bridge Street, connecting to there's two transit pads, one on Bridge Street at the arrow shown there, and then another one near the promenade entrance on Northfield Drive. And then finally, we've got east-west access across the site. And just some quick renderings of the building. We're aiming to, this is a fairly large development for a suburban neighborhood. We are, through the architecture, trying to pull out some of the elements that you would see in a typical maybe urban area and pull it out to this area with the mix of commercial and residential. You see that coming through in the architecture. Thank you.
We have some questions from councilors. Councilor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate that you've made reference on many occasions to maintaining the pedestrian pathway, but there were a lot of commitments made with regard to landscape species. Are you committed to all of that landscaping plan as well?
Yeah, through you, Chair Burke. Yes, we are. I think the one thing that has to be noted as well is we do have to get approval from Hydro One, who has control of that corridor, and they have very strict requirements over the landscaping and what happens underneath and within that corridor. So to the extent that we can, we will certainly maximize the landscaping potential of that site. We'd really like to naturalize it and create as much of a buffer as we can, but we are somewhat limited by their approval process.
I think everyone wanted low prickly bushes, so it's not going to impede the high voltage line. There's a couple of comments I'd like to make more broadly with regard to traffic that I'd appreciate if you could take away. I'm struggling with the comments about the double axle trucks because it's 55-foot trailers that are coming into the McDonald's right now in Northfield, and it's quite an adventure watching them get in and out, but they do it. And so I think that it's very possible that 55-foot trailers are going to be coming in. And more broadly, the comments were related to the volume of traffic that would be encouraged by a change to that I appreciate that you think it was all related to the trucks, but it actually wasn't. And what you're doing by this notion of a drive-through is you're introducing a whole new amount or potential amount of traffic using that Bridge Street entrance. And the community were very vocal about that, and so I'm worried about that. And you know, they had a lot of comments with regard to idle emissions. They didn't want trucks idling on this property from an air quality perspective, and I think that they're going to have similar concerns about vehicle idling in a drive-through lanes. They were worried about light impacts from vehicle lights in and out of the parking lot. You know, they're going to want to know if and I wouldn't think you're going to want to restrict yourself as to who you might rent that space out to, but if it's a 24 hours service provider with that drive-through, I think people are going to be worried about those lights and the encouragement of those lights. I think that it's going to be, there are aspects to the conversation that, yes, were related to the grocery store, but more broadly related to how people access the property and how many people access the property. And with the increased density in the residential, I think it will be helpful to get an understanding of how the daily average traffic changes in and out of this property between the two traffic analysis studies.
Do we have any further questions? Other than the mayor, who I was just getting to, but I wanted to make sure so the neighbor would have his moment. Gee, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair, the benevolent chair. On the Northfield driveways there, are they both full access driveways, or is the second one close to the intersection right in, right out, or how does that work?
Yeah, through you, Chair Burke. The secondary access on the easterly side of the site is a right-in only access. The other one is a full interchange to the west. That's a full interchange with a proposed left turn lane into the site heading westbound on Northfield. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Please. Come on up, sir. Please state your name.
Yes, my name is Bill Breitup. I live on Deer Run Drive, 627 Deer Run. So my backyard is really close to where that hydro pole is. And I appreciate all of Diane's words tonight because she has a better memory in some cases than I do here. I had just a number of questions. One of them was the traffic study. There was a huge issue with that back in the day. This is going back 2-3 years ago. Northfield Drive was a regional road. There's all kinds of work that's supposed to be done to. What is the update on that? I haven't seen any work done on Northfield. Northfield Drive right now, when I look out my back window at 8 o'clock in the morning, from Bridge Street right back to Whistler, in fact, right back to Davenport is backed up. That's how tough that road is. So, and I understood that back then that we were talking about making Northfield Drive a 4-lane road. None of that has happened. So what's the timing issue on this? Are we talking 4 years from now before this starts? Or is this supposed to be next week? I don't understand that. That's one of my concerns is the traffic. Was the traffic study completed? There going to be lights at the entrances and the exits of this place, or are you just going to have to pull out onto Northfield Drive as an example? They have the drives, that's fine. Internal traffic was another issue. Where are the planned garbage areas for all of these buildings? That's not that it matters, but garbage trucks are going to come in and take garbage away. What are the internal road network traffic circulation patterns looking like? Well, we've seen some of that tonight. I'm with Diane. I seem to think that if we come in either off of Bridge or come off of Northfield Drive, and we allow this I'm going to go with the worst case scenario, 24-hour McDonald's, whatever you want to put in there. I think that's going to cause some issues there. In general, I've talked to a number of the people on our street, and they're all pretty happy with the new proposal, but questioning this need for I'm going to call it a fast food restaurant for lack of better idea. The lighting was a big issue, and it wasn't just the lighting, Diane, on the from the cars and the trucks coming in. It was the lighting of the parking lot, and because that could actually end up just becoming a ball diamond, so to speak, with all the parking that's back there. I understood from before that you were going to be able to actually, you can't put a building under the hydro lines, but I think in the past they were talking about they're going to park all the cars under the hydro lines. I question that. It becomes a problem with snow. Where is all the snow going to go? This is a huge parking lot. When you take a look at the total ground space, we have concerns of water runoff, that kind of stuff. If the stuff's all built properly, I'm sure there'll be no problems, but that's another concern, is the water and light pollution runoffs. Landscaping, I think you've answered most of those questions. I understood originally, though, that they were even talking about doing fences. Was I wrong on that, Diane? No? Okay. Shrubs and trees, I guess, are going to stay from what I just heard a few minutes ago. Are there going to be heating units and air conditioning units on the top of these buildings, so that now we're not just talking 6 stories, we're talking further? Because back in the old days, when most people bought on Deer Run Drive, they all understood that there was going to never be anything more than 4 stories. That's what, and so the previous people that we were dealing with, they boosted that to 6. But it seems to be, is it 6 plus air conditioning and heating and that kind of stuff? Who knows? Parking, how many spaces a unit? Is it going to be sufficient for, if we're talking, I think I heard earlier, 102 in 2 different buildings, so 204, 206 apartments? 288. So it's just the number of vehicles going in and out of, again, off a bridge as well as off of Northfield Drive could be a problem. Are these units going to be rentals, or are they actually purchased? Are they condos? Condos? Okay. Garbage collection, how's that going to work? Is it going to be coordinated with all these other businesses, or is everybody going to run their own? That could be an interesting situation. How many times a day, a week is garbage going to come and be collected for residential and commercial? And where is now the storage going to be located? Is it going to cause problems with, as I say, snow and those things? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Any councilors have questions of the delegation? Don't run away yet. I think we might. Councilor Freeman.
So just a few follow-up questions based on Mr. Bridup's presentation. There was a lot of questions with regard to site plan that wouldn't typically come to council, but were captured in the previous site plan approvals. So it would be helpful to understand how we deal with that. So the site plan issues that Mr. Bridup raised included snow loading zone, waste collection zones, traffic circulation through the site. And there was a commitment I had recalled for dark sky lighting before, and I don't know whether that was captured as a condition within the site specific. So I think it will be very, very helpful to have that community meeting to talk about the site specific site plan things that were captured before, because I'm trying to remember them all, but I can't. And the I didn't hear you ask for a parking reduction, so that leads me to believe that the site has the required amount of parking by the bylaw or more. Is that right? Okay, I see Ms. Voss nodding. And it's my understanding, I'm pretty sure this was always zoned multi-residential 6 right from the get-go as opposed to 4, but that's something that maybe staff can look into. Because I think that was the one thing that didn't change in the last go-around. But thank you.
Is there anyone else present who wishes to speak to this application?
Stephen Herzog. I don't live in the immediate area, but if I did, I would have a concern, which is snow plowing in the winter. We have a small apartment building on Elgin Street, and every night after a heavy snow plow all night, we hear snow plows going, and they make a lot of noise. I think from the developer's point of view that if you provide garages that people will pay extra to have an enclosed garage or sheltered parking, and then there's less plowing to do. That's one concern that I don't think Mr. Breithaupt mentioned in his comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Councilor Freeman.
I did forget that it would be helpful if staff wanted to contact the region to provide an update in the next meeting with citizens around the widening of Northfield. I think understanding those traffic patterns on Northfield will be worthwhile. My understanding is it's in the budget to actually be constructed in 2019 because the region said it was going to be 2015. They pushed it off because they had allocated capital resources to another large project. And but my understanding is that it's scheduled to be constructed in 2019. But it will be helpful because I think that it will be particularly helpful because I had recalled that there was going to be signalized control at one of the entrances to this property, but I don't know whether that's still in place, so onto Northfield. So.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this application? Please come up and state your name.
Good evening, Derek Manlow, 633 Deer Run Drive. There's a question posed earlier this evening regarding the proposed time frame of construction of the site. I just request that there be clarification as to the proposed time frame for each phase. That'll be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we anyone else? Thank you, by the way. Are you raising your hand, sir? You may. Come on up.
So, through you, Chair Burke, just to clarify the 2 points, with respect to Northfield Drive construction, we've been working very closely with the region. It's our understanding that construction of Northfield, the reconstruction and the widening of it is occurring this year. They're currently making preparations. Their drawings are done and they're going out for tender in the next few weeks. So that construction will be occurring this year. With respect to phasing, our intention is to launch the first building to market this year. As I mentioned previously, I think all 3 buildings are proposed to be condominium and sold to the end consumer. We've had some pre-marketing going on. It's been very well received. We fully anticipate that at least 2 buildings will be sold this year and under construction, with the 3rd building proceeding next year.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Henry.
And just towards not only, I mean, we don't have mechanisms to force or require any particular construction phasing, plan, notwithstanding any specific commitments the applicant may make at any point. That's not a lever we have to stage development.
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Henry, no, we don't typically have any policies in place that require phasing to be done in such a way. The applicant has come forward with amendments to the official plan and amendments to the zoning bylaw that permit the development as a whole. How they choose to phase it is typically a market decision.
Any further questions? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this application? If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to Council at a later date. For those who are interested, of course, who are the registers at the back, please make sure you put your name and contact information so we can keep you abreast of items that consider with this application. We'll move on to our next item. By the way, for those of you who stayed to the end, thank you. It doesn't happen very often. Consideration notice of motion given at previous meeting, none. Notice of motion, none. Communications and correspondence, none. Regional information and correspondence, none. Unfinished business, any new business? Seeing none, any questions? Well, how about this adjournment? Have we someone for that? Oh, Councillor Durrell and Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? Away we go. Thank you.
Hey, hold on, Councillor Durrell.
I know, we have a special council meeting.
Welcome to the shortest special council meeting of City of Waterloo, Monday, March 5th, 2018. Disclosure of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof. Seeing none. Somebody want to enact some bylaws? Councillor Durrell does. Councillor Henry does. All those in favor? That's all of us. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Durrell, Councillor Reith. All those in favor? That's us.